Hi guys, and welcome to Anunnaki's Sanctuaries channel. Tonight, we step into a city that barely exists yet. A place where the night air smells like wet clay and crushed reeds, where 1,000 small cooking fires blink like grounded stars, and where you, yes you, are about to learn the simplest, most dangerous truth of early civilization. If you build a wall, you will also build a god to stand on top of it. You probably won't survive this. Not because a monster jumps out, but because your modern brain will try to keep everything logical, while the ancient world keeps whispering, calmly, that logic is just another tool in the toolbox. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and your local time in the comments, because it is always soothing to realize other humans are awake with you, blinking at the dark. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing in soil that remembers water. The ground under your feet has that soft give, like it is still deciding whether to be mud or dust. Somewhere nearby, a river shifts in its sleep, and you can hear it. Not in a dramatic waterfall way, but in a low, steady shush that makes your thoughts slow down. The settlement around you is not yet a proud city-state with a name that will make students groan in history class. It is more like a nervous cluster. Houses press close, not because everyone loves community, but because darkness is wide and people are small. You move down a narrow lane where the walls are made of sun-baked brick, patched and smoothed by hands that never really stop working. A dog lifts its head and decides you're not worth barking at it, which is honestly the best kind of ancient welcome. On a rooftop, someone has spread reeds to dry, and the smell is sharp and green, like the city is chewing. And here is your first mainstream fact, delivered quietly so it does not startle you awake. Some of the earliest true cities in human history rise in Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates, where irrigation agriculture supports dense populations. This is not the romantic, people just gathered because vibes story. It is grain. Grain is the boring magic. Grain is the reason a place can hold thousands of people without instantly collapsing into chaos. And the moment you can feed thousands, you must also organize thousands. And the moment you organize thousands, you start needing explanations that feel bigger than any single person. So you keep walking, and you notice how the lanes bend. The settlement is not laid out like a neat grid. It curls like a body protecting its organs. Houses are close enough that you could pass a bowl of stew through a window if you liked your neighbor, and if your neighbor did not owe you barley. The center is not a palace, not yet. The center is a raised platform of packed earth and brick, a place that seems to be both practical and sacred. Like the settlement cannot decide if it is storing grain there or storing hope. You climb the slight rise. The air changes. Up here, the breeze has less smoke in it and more river. From this viewpoint, you can see the outer edge of the settlement, the boundary where houses stop and fields begin. And the fields are where the real drama happens, because fields are promises. Fields say, "We will be here next season." Fields say, "We are investing in tomorrow." Fields say, "We dare to be predictable." And predictability is a bold act in a world where a flood can rewrite your entire life. People are already thinking in city-state terms, even if the word does not exist yet. The settlement is not just a bunch of families. It is a unit. It is a stomach. It is a schedule. It is a list of obligations. Some folks plant. Some folks mend tools. Some folks watch children. Some folks watch strangers. And some folks watch the skies if the sky's a moody landlord. You feel it, that subtle mental shift. the way everyone around you treats the settlement like a living thing. When the river rises, the settlement suffers. When the harvest is good, the settlement rejoices. It is not I am safe, but we are safe. The wall, even if it is only a partial ring of barrier and ditch, is not just defense. It is identity. Here is the quiet trick. Once you draw a line between inside and outside, you create the perfect stage for gods. Inside becomes ordered, blessed, watched. Outside becomes wild, hungry, uncounted. A city-state is basically a giant group chat where everyone is arguing about who forgot to bring water, except the stakes are famine and raids and disease. And to keep the group chat from exploding, you need a moderator. In a world without apps, the moderator is divine. You pass a doorway where a little clay figurine sits in a niche, barely visible in the shadow. Its shape is simple, almost cute, like someone tried to sculpt a human from memory while half asleep. That is your first glimpse of the idea that protection can be placed, stationed, assigned. This is your quirky tidbit for the night, long before grand statues. People in the ancient Near East use small figurines and amulets as protective presences, sometimes buried in foundations or tucked into walls, like spiritual security cameras that never blink. It is domestic and intimate. The divine is not only thunder and stars. The divine is also a tiny lump of clay that says, "Please do not let the roof fall." You keep drifting forward, slow enough that your shoulders unclench. You begin to notice how sound behaves in the settlement. Outside the houses, there is a constant murmur of human life, but it is softened by mud brick and woven mats. The city is padded. It is like walking through a sleeping animal's rib cage. A baby cries, then stops. Someone coughs. Somewhere a pot clinks. The night is not silent. It is simply steady, and steadiness is a kind of prayer. At the raised platform, a few people are awake, not guarding in the soldier sense, more like tending. They move with the calm focus of people who are used to being responsible for things that cannot be allowed to fail. A basket of grain sits near a low wall. A clay jar is sealed with a plug. A reed mat covers something you cannot see. This is where the settlement keeps its heartbeat, where food becomes future, and you sense, even without anyone explaining it, that the community is beginning to imagine the stored grain as belonging to someone beyond any individual family. If the grain belongs to everyone, it belongs to no one. If it belongs to no one, someone will try to take it. So the grain must belong to a higher authority. Enter the god, not yet as a dramatic personality with a long myth and a complicated family tree. At first, the god is simply the owner of the center. The god is the excuse that makes collective storage possible. The god is the invisible lock on the granary door. This is where city-states shape the gods, not by inventing them from nothing, but by giving them civic jobs. And yes, historians still argue whether the earliest gods are primarily personifications of natural forces, or primarily social constructs shaped by emerging institutions. Some scholars emphasize the river and the storm and the sun. Others point at the administrative center, the collective labor, the need for moral authority. It is probably both, because humans are excellent at mixing practical needs with cosmic poetry. Like adding cinnamon to medicine so you will actually swallow it. You sit for a moment on the edge of the platform because you are not in a hurry. The night is warm. A little breeze touches your face and tastes faintly of salt and ash. From here you can see the wall line more clearly. It is uneven, perhaps still being built. Some sections are higher. Some are just piles of bricks waiting for tomorrow's work. But even unfinished, it is symbolic. It says, We are a we, and that we makes the divine feel local. You can almost hear it in the way people talk. Not the gods in the abstract, but our God, the one who favors this patch of earth, this stretch of canal, this set of streets. A city-state god is like a hometown sports team, except instead of losing your voice in a stadium, you lose your harvest if you forget the offering. Light joke number 1. Imagine explaining to your modern landlord that you are late on rent because the neighborhood deity is in a mood. The landlord would not care. But the ancient city absolutely would. As you watch, one of the awake tenders takes a small bowl and pours a little beer or watered wine onto the ground. The gesture is casual. Practiced, it is not theatrical. It is like leaving a tip, a tiny offering to whatever presence is believed to inhabit this center. The offering is not about generosity. It is about relationship. In a city, relationships have to scale up. You cannot personally know everyone. So you create a shared relationship with an unseen patron, and that shared relationship becomes glue. You wander down from the platform and follow a path toward the fields. The city edge is where you can feel anxiety. It is the place where the inside meets the outside. A ditch cuts the earth. A fence of woven reeds stands crooked. Beyond it, the darkness opens. The stars are brighter here. It makes you realize how much light and smoke and human noise the settlement contains. Out there, beyond the boundary, are other groups. Some are friendly, some are hungry, some are both, depending on the season. In the earliest periods, city-states are not just competing economies, they are competing cosmic claims. When you say our God, you're also saying our land, our water, our right to exist. The divine becomes a flag you can't fold. And because you are you, a modern mind in ancient air, you might be tempted to think this is all manipulation. Leaders controlling people with religion. Sure, that happens, and it will get more intense later. But right now, it is also sincere. People are genuinely trying to make sense of a world where survival feels like a negotiation with forces that do not speak your language. A god is a way to talk back. You crouch near the field edge. The soil is dark and damp. You rub it between your fingers. It smells alive, like something that wants to grow. You look back at the settlement and see how small it is compared to the landscape. This is another reality check, the one that makes your chest soften. Early cities are fragile. A bad flood, a drought, a raid, and the whole cluster can vanish. The wall is bravery. The granary is hope. The god is reassurance. Light joke number 2. You can almost picture the first person who suggests, "What if the god wants us to build a bigger wall?" And everyone goes, "Wow, the god is so wise." Even though the suggestion is basically, let's not die. Humans have always been like this. We love spiritualizing common sense. It makes chores feel epic. As you drift back into the lanes, you notice little marks on doorways. Maybe a smear of bitumen. Maybe a carved symbol. Not standardized yet. Not official. But consistent enough to hint at shared meaning. Protection, belonging, identity. The city is teaching people to think in symbols, to see their world as layered, physical walls and invisible ones, practical routines and sacred rhythms. You pass a sleeping family. Their bodies are curled close. The air around them is warmer. A child's hand rests on a clay doll for a moment. The divine feels very small, very tender. Not thunder, not empire. Just the human desire to have something watch over you when you cannot stay awake. Light joke number 3. If you ever wondered why humans invent gods, try sleeping in a mud brick house with no locks and a roof that can leak. And then tell me you do not want a cosmic night guard who works overtime. You return to the center again, because the center calls, and you realize the timeline is beginning, not in dates and dynasties, but in habits. People gather, people store, people defend, people mark boundaries, people assign responsibility, and the gods, quietly, start taking shape as the personalities of those responsibilities. A city-state does not just build temples later. It builds the idea of the god as the city's partner. The god becomes local like the smell of the river. The god becomes practical like grain. The god becomes political like a wall. And as you let your breathing slow, you feel the first thread of what is coming. Each time a city grows a little more organized, its gods will grow a little more specialized. Each time the boundary hardens, the divine will harden with it. Each time the city imagines itself as a single body. It will imagine a single protector standing just above the rooftops, watching the canals, the gates, the storehouses. You can almost see that protector now, not as a statue, but as a feeling, a sense that this cluster of houses is not alone in the dark, that it is claimed, guarded, named, and you keep walking, deeper into the sleeping lanes, where tomorrow's work already waits in the mud, and where the first city-state, still soft around the edges, is quietly inventing the kind of god it needs. You drift back toward that raised center, because your feet have already learned the logic of the place. Everything important eventually funnels inward. The lanes feel narrower now, not because they changed, but because your mind is starting to measure them the way an ancient resident would. You notice the practical details, the way doorways face inward, the way roofs overlap like protective hands, the way people sleep close to their walls as if the bricks can hear them. And the center is awake in its own quiet way, not bustling, not ceremonial with trumpets and drama, but humming like a pantry that never truly closes. A couple of figures move by lamplight, and the flame is soft and fat, fed by oil that smells faintly nutty. The light makes everything look warmer than it is. It also makes shadows look like they have opinions. You step up again onto that packed platform, and this time you see the structure more clearly. It is not just a mound. It is a system. A low building sits there, squat and sturdy, with walls thicker than any house you passed. The doorway is controlled, narrow, almost stubborn. This is where you feel the shift from family life to civic life. Houses are personal. This building is collective. It belongs to everyone and to no one, which is the fastest way to start a fight unless you invent something clever. So the settlement does. Here comes your mainstream historical fact for tonight. Slipped under your pillow in many early Mesopotamian city-states, temples function as major economic institutions, involved in storing and redistributing grain, managing labor, and organizing large projects. That is not a poetic metaphor. It is a practical arrangement that shapes everything. When you put the biggest pile of food behind the thickest walls, and you call it sacred, you are also calling it protected by the strongest possible security system. Social consequences. Because if you steal from a neighbor, you might get caught. If you steal from the god, the whole city can blame you for the next drought. Anxiety is a powerful lock. You step inside, or at least you step to the threshold, because you are not trying to get yourself dragged out by a sleepy guard with a stick. The air changes immediately. Outside, smoke and animal smells blend with damp earth. Inside, the air is cooler, drier, thick with grain dust and the faint sweetness of stored barley. It is the smell of calories waiting to become winter survival. In the dimness, you see stacks, baskets, jars, maybe even sealed bins lined with bitumen. There are little clay stoppers, lumps pressed into place, and pressed into those lumps are marks. Not writing yet in the way you picture writing, but impressions, symbols, a kind of early signature. You lean closer. A seal imprint is like a fingerprint you can share. It says, "This jar is accounted for. This basket belongs to the system." It is the ancient version of a barcode, except instead of scanning it with a laser, you scan it with fear of being publicly shamed. Light joke number 1. Your modern grocery store has security cameras. This place has a god and a scribe. Honestly, I'm not sure which one is more intimidating. You hear a soft scratch. Someone is working. A person crouches near a low surface, and by the lamplight you can see they are handling small clay tokens or a tablet. Their posture is careful, almost tender, because clay remembers. You make a little mental note that in this world, memory is not mainly inside your head. Memory is in objects, in seals, in tablets, in storerooms. The city-state begins to outsource remembering, and that makes the city feel like it has a brain. And once the city feels like a living organism, the god becomes its soul. You shift your attention to a small altar-like space. It is not grand, maybe a niche with a simple stand, a bowl for offerings, a little pile of ash. But it is placed in a way that makes the whole room feel oriented around it. It is subtle. The building is a warehouse. Yes, but it is also a home for a presence, and that presence is framed as the owner, not symbolically owner, literally owner. If you ask the people here whose grain this is, they might not say the community's, they might say the god's. And that is the cleverness, because the god does not eat the grain in the normal way. The god receives offerings, but most of the stored food is redistributed to workers, priests, craftspeople, widows, whoever the system decides should be fed. The god's ownership becomes a legal fiction that lets the city manage resources without one family claiming it all. Historians still argue whether this temple-centered economy is primarily a religious development that becomes economic, or an economic necessity that becomes religious. You can feel why the debate exists. The lines blur. To the people living it, there is no clean separation. Sacred and practical are braided together like reeds in a basket. You walk along the storage area, and you notice there are categories. This side is grain. That corner is oil. Over there are textiles. The smell changes as you pass each zone. Oil is rich and slightly sharp. Cloth has that dry, dusty softness. Grain is the steady bass line, like the bass note in a song. The organization itself is a kind of quiet authority. It tells you that someone has decided what matters, and someone is keeping track. And the more you keep track, the more you need a reason why the tracking is legitimate. Enter the god again, calmly, like a stamp on wet clay. A whisper of voices rises and falls. You catch fragments, numbers, names, deliveries. The language is not yours, but the tone is universal. The tone of people trying to prevent a mess. You realize how much of the god's personality will be shaped by this environment. A god who lives in a warehouse will not be only a wild force of nature. That god will be orderly, possessive, serious about boundaries. That god will hate theft and love accurate measures. Not because heaven is obsessed with accounting, but because the city is. You stand near a set of measuring tools, a scoop, a weight, a standard container. Your mind does that sleepy click where a concept snaps into place. If you standardize measures, you standardize fairness. If you standardize fairness, you reduce internal conflict. If you reduce internal conflict, you can survive long enough to fight the outside world. And if the god is the owner of the measures, then cheating becomes not only immoral, but cosmic. This is your quirky tidbit for the section. The little sideways fact that makes the ancient world feel weirdly familiar. Early administrative systems sometimes begin with clay tokens representing quantities of goods, which later get enclosed in clay envelopes and marked on the outside, a step on the long road toward writing. Imagine your receipts evolving into sacred objects because they are literally how society holds together. It is like if your banking app became a shrine. Light joke number 2. Sorry, I cannot come to dinner. I have to pray to the ledger. And yet, here, that is not even a joke. It is Tuesday. A door opens. A gust of outside air slides in, carrying smoke and the faint odor of livestock. A worker enters with a basket on their shoulder, and you watch the process. The basket is set down, the contents checked, a mark made, perhaps a seal pressed. It is ritual and routine at once. The steps are predictable. The predictability is comforting. It turns randomness into schedule. You see now how the temple becomes the city-state's stomach and pantry, but also its calendar. If you bring grain at the harvest, you receive rations later. If you work on a canal, you are fed. If you are old, maybe you are supported. The god's house becomes a distribution center. The god becomes the figure that pays you, even though the payments come from human hands. And here is the psychological genius. If your paycheck comes from the god, then work becomes devotion. Labor becomes meaningful, not always joyful. Let us not pretend, but meaningful enough that people endure it. You can almost feel the shift in your own chest. In a fragile world, meaning is a nutrient. You step back out into the night, and the air hits your face like a cool cloth. The stars are still there, indifferent and steady, but inside you, something has changed. You see the city-state as an engine now. It takes in grain and labor and outputs survival. The god is the emblem on the machine, and because this is a city-state, that emblem is local. The god's name, the god's symbol, the god's favored rituals, all begin to differentiate this place from other places. A neighboring settlement might have its own central store, its own patron presence, its own sacred owner. Over time, these divine owners will become distinct personalities, with myths explaining why they own what they own. But right now, the foundation is simple. The god is the legal and moral framework that lets a lot of people share a lot of food without tearing each other apart. Light joke number 3. You know how modern office kitchens have signs that say, "Do not steal other people's lunch." Congratulations. You have discovered the ancient version. Except the sign is invisible, and the punishment might be blamed on the weather. As you walk along the edge of the platform, you see the workers finishing up. A jar is sealed, a basket is covered, a lamp is lowered. The building settles into darkness. But the sense of presence does not leave. The idea of the owner stays awake even when the humans sleep. You look out across the clustered roofs again. Somewhere, someone snores. Somewhere, someone murmurs in their sleep. Somewhere, a baby stirs and is soothed. The city-state is a body, and the temple is its stomach. And the god is the story the body tells itself, so it can keep functioning. You move down to the lanes, and you can feel the rest of the timeline tugging at you like a slow current. Because once a god owns grain, it is only a small step for a king to say he manages the god's property. Only a small step for officials to claim divine backing. Only a small step for the city-state to turn sacred ownership into political power. But for now, in this warm, dusty night, the truth is almost gentle. A warehouse becomes a holy place, and a god becomes a landlord you cannot argue with. And somehow that helps you sleep. Because at least someone is in charge, even if that someone is invisible. You keep moving through the lanes as the night thins out, not into dawn exactly, but into that murky middle where the air is still cool and people begin to stir like embers, deciding whether to glow. The city-state does not wake all at once. It wakes in pockets. A door creaks. A goat complains. Someone coughs and then immediately pretends they did not, as if the darkness might judge them for it. You follow the sound of footsteps toward the central space again, because your body has learned a pattern. Home, lane, center, home, lane, center. Repetition is how early cities train you, and repetition is how early power learns to stand upright. Near the temple storehouse, a small gathering forms, not a crowd like a festival, more like a practical knot of people waiting for instructions. You smell damp wool, old smoke, and the faint, sour edge of last night's beer. A worker adjusts a strap on their shoulder. Another rubs sleep from their eyes. They stand with the patient irritation of people who know they will be told to carry something heavy. Then you see him. Not a king in the crown and cape way your brain wants to imagine, but a figure whose posture says, "I'm used to being obeyed." He is flanked by a couple of attendants. His clothes are a little finer. His hair is kept with more intention. His sandals are not the half-falling-apart variety. You can feel the way the air around him changes, because humans are basically mood antennas. When someone has authority, everyone else starts acting like gravity got stronger. This is where your mainstream historical fact slides in, soft and steady. In early Mesopotamian city-states, rulers often present themselves as chosen by, favored by, or acting on behalf of a city's patron deity. Kingship is not only a military or administrative role. It is framed as a sacred duty, a bridge between the human schedule and the cosmic one. And you watch the bridge being built in real time. The figure approaches the temple threshold, not barging in, but moving with a practiced respect. He does not act like he owns the place. He acts like he is close to the owner. That distinction matters. If the god owns the grain, and the temple manages the god's grain, then the ruler who manages the temple's work can claim to be the god's right hand. He is not stealing authority. He is borrowing it. Borrowing divinity is one of humanity's oldest hobbies. You notice a small ritual gesture? It could be a bow, a touch. You follow the ruler's wake for a while, that subtle trail of respect and irritation that power always leaves behind. Then, as the day warms, your attention slides away from faces and toward infrastructure, because city-states are not only made of people, they are made of lines cut into earth. The lanes become paths, the paths become embankments, and before you realize it, you are walking beside a canal, listening to water move with a purposeful, man-made patience. The canal is not a river. A river is a wild animal. This is a leash. You crouch at the edge and watch the water carry silt, shimmering under a light that is still soft enough to feel like morning's first whisper. On the far side, fields stretch out, and they look calm. But you know they are basically an ongoing argument between humans and climate. The crops do not grow because the land is generous. They grow because someone dug, diverted, maintained, and yelled at everyone to stop dumping trash in the water. Civilizations are built on a foundation of, "Please do not ruin the canal." And yes, that is as glamorous as it sounds. Here is your mainstream historical fact for tonight, delivered like a slow sip. Irrigation agriculture in Mesopotamia depends on canals and coordinated labor, and those systems tie closely to calendrical knowledge, including tracking lunar months and seasonal cycles. When you have to coordinate water distribution, you also have to coordinate time. Water is schedule. Time is power. You walk along the canal's edge and see how it splits. One branch goes toward a cluster of fields. Another curls toward the city. A smaller channel veers off, barely a trickle, like an afterthought. Yet every diversion matters. If your field gets water, your family eats. If it does not, you become the person staring at the sky with the haunted look of someone waiting for mercy. And because mercy is unpredictable, the city-state begins to make it predictable by wrapping it in ritual. At a junction where the canal gates are set, you see a simple wooden mechanism, maybe a sluice, maybe just a barrier of woven reeds and mud. A couple of workers stand there with tools. Their hands are stained with earth. Their nails are short and practical. They speak in short bursts. Their entire job is to decide who gets water today and how much. It is not just manual labor. It is politics in sandals. You notice something else. A little offering place near the junction. A shallow bowl. A stain of ash. A few dried bits that could have been dates or bread. Someone has marked this spot as important, not because it is pretty, but because it controls life. This is where a city-state starts shaping its gods into bureaucrats. A storm god is not merely thunder. A water god is not merely river. They become overseers of gates, arbiters of allotments, patrons of engineers. They acquire job descriptions because the city acquires systems. You can almost feel the divine being drafted into service, like a cosmic employee who did not apply for the position, but now has a desk. Light joke number 1. If you have ever cursed a slow government office, just know the ancient world had the same vibe. Except the paperwork was clay, and the supervisor was a deity who might express dissatisfaction through crop failure. So, no pressure. You keep walking, and the sky begins to matter more. The sun climbs, and shadows shorten. The day has a rhythm, and the people here treat that rhythm like a rule book. At the edge of the fields, you see someone standing still, looking upward, not in a dreamy way, but in a calculating way. Their eyes move as if counting invisible marks. You realize that time is not just experienced, it is measured. This is your quirky tidbit for this section, long before clocks. Some city-states rely on specialists who track celestial cycles, using the moon's phases and the rising of certain stars to anchor months and seasons. Over time, this leads to complex calendrical systems. And yes, it becomes deeply entangled with religion, because if the gods control the sky, then your calendar becomes a divine document. You imagine, sleepily, how it works. Someone decides when a month begins. Someone declares a festival. Someone announces, now is the time to plant. Now is the time to harvest. Now is the time to repair the canal. Those announcements carry authority. And in a city-state, authority likes to wear sacred clothing. So the sky watchers become temple-connected. The calendar becomes holy. The gods become punctual. And this is where historians still argue whether early astronomical observation is driven primarily by practical agricultural needs or by religious and divinatory motivations. Did people watch the moon because they needed to coordinate labor, or because they believed the moon was speaking? Probably both. Humans rarely pick one reason when they can have two. Like ordering dessert and claiming it is for balance. You stop near a small field and watch a farmer test the soil, rubbing it between fingers, checking moisture. The gesture looks like the one you did earlier, but now it feels more weighted. Here, soil is not just earth. It is a contract. If the canal delivers water, the soil will pay you back in grain. If the canal fails, the soil becomes a quiet betrayal. A child runs past with a small clay toy. laughing, and for a second the whole world feels normal. Then the child's mother calls out, sharp and urgent, because the child is too close to the water gate. A slip there could mean injury, or worse. It could mean disturbing a system that everyone depends on. Even small accidents are civic events in a place like this. You notice boundary stones or markers, rough and practical, placed where one plot ends and another begins. The city-state divides land, and division requires agreement, and agreement requires enforcement. The gods, again, become useful. If a marker is sacred, moving it is not just cheating, it is inviting cosmic consequences. The divine becomes an invisible fence. Light joke number 2, the ancient version of "do not touch my property line" is basically "do not anger the god who lives in this stone," which is a way more intense homeowner association than anything modern suburbs have ever invented. As the sun climbs higher, the air grows warmer, and the scent of wet earth rises, rich and heavy. You hear insects, you hear distant voices, you hear the canal's steady hush, and you realize it is not only moving water, it is moving time, it is moving labor, it is moving the city's ability to plan. And planning changes the gods. A god in a hunter-gatherer world can be a mood, a presence, a story told by firelight. A god in a city-state becomes a schedule. A god becomes the reason the festival happens on the correct day, the reason the gates open when they should, the reason the canal is repaired before it collapses. Divine favor becomes something you can, in theory, manage, make offerings, follow rituals, obey taboos, keep the calendar, in theory, because nature still throws tantrums. A flood can come early, a drought can linger, a storm can shred the fields, and when that happens, the city-state's relationship with its gods deepens into negotiation. People ask, what did we do wrong? Who failed to honor the right power? Which ritual was sloppy? Which official miscounted the month? The city-state's systems become a mirror for divine order. So when the system fails, the gods feel angry. You walk back toward the city, following the canal inward. As you approach the walls, you see the water channel narrowing, controlled. The city drinks from it through smaller branches, like veins. The sound changes, echoing off brick. The smell shifts from field soil to human life. At the gate, someone stands with a list, not on paper, but in memory and marks. They watch who enters. They watch what is carried. The city-state is learning to regulate flow. Water flow, food flow, people flow. Regulation creates predictability. Predictability creates the illusion that the world can be managed. And if the world can be managed, then gods must be the managers above the managers. Light joke number 3. Somewhere in this city-state, a deity is basically being promoted into middle management. And the deity did not even get a performance review. Just one day, you are the storm. The next day, you are responsible for the canal schedule. Congratulations. Divine Employee of the Month. As you slip into the lanes again, the heat of the day settles on the bricks, and the city hums with work. You feel your own breathing match the rhythm. Inhale with the canal's hush. Exhale with the distant chatter. The gods, too, begin to feel like part of that rhythm, not distant, not abstract, but threaded into the daily mechanics. The water gate, the calendar, the field boundary, the festival day, and you sense the next slow turn of the timeline waiting ahead. Because once time is measured and water is scheduled, someone will start claiming they alone can interpret the sky correctly. Someone will start declaring which day the god truly wants. Someone will start using the calendar as authority. You move through the warm air, letting your mind soften around that thought. And the city-state, with its canals and moon counts, keeps teaching its gods to be organized, to be punctual, to be very, very invested in whether you showed up on the right day with the right offering. You stay close to the city's edge now, where the air carries two flavors at once. Inside smells like smoke, bread, and bodies. Outside smells like open earth and wild plants warming under the sun. The boundary is a thin line, but everyone treats it like a cliff. The wall rises in sections, patched and rebuilt, as if the city is forever trying to finish a sentence it keeps getting interrupted from writing. You walk parallel to the wall, slow, steady, letting your footsteps sync with the city's heartbeat. Every so often you pass a gate, and each gate feels like a mouth. It opens. It closes. It decides what counts as us and what counts as not us. Here is your mainstream historical fact for this section. In many ancient Near Eastern city-states, gates and boundary points are crucial administrative and defensive locations, often monitored and regulated, and they become focal points for legal proceedings, taxation, and public announcements. The gate is not just architecture. It is authority made visible, and once authority becomes visible, it becomes sacred, because people love giving halos to anything that makes them feel safe. At one gate, you see a cluster of men and women standing under a shade cloth. Their voices rise and fall. Someone gestures with a stick. Someone points at a bundle of reeds. It looks like an argument about goods, but it is really an argument about rules. And rules need enforcement. You notice a small niche cut into the brick near the gate. Inside it is a little figure or symbol, maybe a carved stone, maybe a clay object darkened by smoke. A tiny offering bowl sits below, with a crust of dried liquid. This gate has a guardian, not a guard, not a person with a spear, though those exist too. A guardian presence, a divine job assignment. You are seeing the city-state's talent for specialization. If there is a problem area, it gets a god. If there is a risky crossing point, it gets a divine bouncer. And yes, city-states create a lot of these jobs, because city-states are basically the universe's most anxious spreadsheets. Everything needs a column, everything needs a category, everything needs a protector. This is your quirky tidbit for tonight. Across ancient Mesopotamian traditions, people use protective figures, symbols, and ritual deposits at thresholds, doorways, and gates. Because thresholds are imagined as especially vulnerable points where harmful forces can slip through. It is like the city thinks in terms of cracks and leaks. If evil exists, it probably enters where the air enters. Light joke number 1. The modern version is installing a door camera and then still checking it every 5 minutes because you heard a leaf fall. The ancient version is putting a tiny guardian figure in a niche and then whispering, "Please do your job." Every time the wind changes, you keep walking, and you realize boundaries are not only walls, they are also stones set in fields, ropes marking property lines, painted marks on doorposts, and even social boundaries like who is allowed to enter certain spaces. The city-state is a machine that runs on distinctions. Citizen versus stranger, temple worker versus farmer, inside the wall versus outside the wall. Those distinctions become moral distinctions too. Inside is cleaner. Inside is blessed. Inside has a shared God. Outside is questionable. Outside is where things happen that the city cannot count or control. And anything you cannot count feels like a threat. You can see how this mindset shapes the gods. They become territorial. They become jealous. They become proud. Not because divinity naturally behaves like a city politician, but because the city is teaching divinity how to act. You pause at a boundary stone just outside the wall, where a path splits toward a canal and toward the fields. The stone is rough, half buried, and someone has smeared something on it. Maybe oil, maybe bitumen. It glistens in the sun like a quiet warning. The stone is doing two jobs. It marks space, and it marks meaning. It says, "This far and no farther." And it also says, "Someone powerful cares about this line." Historians still argue whether these protective and boundary practices arise mainly from fear of supernatural forces or from the social need to police behavior through shared belief. Do people believe a spirit truly lives in the gate? Or do they find the belief useful because it keeps the gate respected? Again, the answer is probably a cozy blend. Humans are very good at believing something and using it at the same time. Like believing in healthy eating while mysteriously buying cookies anyway. You walk through the gate itself, and you feel the psychological click. Passing through a controlled opening does something to your body. Your shoulders shift. You become aware of being seen. The city-state's gaze is strongest at its borders. A guard looks you over. A scribe or tallykeeper watches the goods being brought in. You hear a brief negotiation. Someone pays a small toll. The whole interaction feels routine, but it also feels like a ritual of belonging. And here is the quiet timeline point. Gates teach people that entry is conditional. If entry is conditional, then membership is precious. If membership is precious, then the god of the city becomes precious. The god becomes the emblem of who gets to be in. You notice how the gate area is also a place of announcements. Someone speaks, and a few people listen. The information might be about labor for canal repair, or a festival day, or dispute settlement. The gate is where the city-state tells itself what is happening, which means the gate is where the god's will can be conveniently announced. Like joke number 2. If you ever wondered why ancient rulers loved saying, "The god wants this," it is because the gate crowd is basically the ancient version of a social media feed. You say it here, and the whole city hears it by lunchtime. You move deeper into the city again, but you keep noticing thresholds everywhere. Doorways are narrow. Many have raised steps. Some have little hollows in the wall near them. People step over them carefully, as if tripping is not only clumsy but also unlucky. A threshold is a tiny boundary you cross dozens of times a day. And each crossing is a reminder. Your life is a series of inside and outside moments. The gods begin to occupy those moments. A household might have its own little protective presence, while the city has a larger guardian at the main gate, and the temple has its own intense set of protections. The divine world becomes layered, like nested bowls, and city-states love layers, because layers create organization. Organization creates stability. Stability keeps you alive. You stop near a workshop where a craftsman shapes brick or carves wood. The work is steady, rhythmic. The craftsman pauses to wipe sweat and glance toward the street. A stranger passes. The craftsman's eyes follow them until they turn a corner. Suspicion is not personal. It is structural. The city-state trains you to watch the border even when you are far from it. In that training, gods become watchful too. A guardian deity is often imagined as fierce, alert, sometimes even frightening. The city does not want a soft, dreamy gate god. The city wants a bouncer who looks like he has never laughed in his life. This is how architecture shapes theology. Your wall demands a defender, and the defender becomes divine, like joke number 3. Somewhere, a poor deity is being cast as gate guardian number 7 and is thinking, "I used to be a mysterious spirit of the wind, and now I'm basically a security guard for city politics." Ancient job markets were brutal. As the afternoon light slants, you find yourself back near the wall again, watching the outside world through gaps. You see a caravan in the distance, a line of figures moving slow, and you feel the city's alertness rise like a collective inhale. Trade can be good. Trade can also bring trouble. The gate will decide, and that decision carries sacred weight, because once you believe a divine guardian controls entry, then the gate is not just a place where humans make choices. It is a place where cosmic order is maintained. The city-state's borders become the borders of the sacred. Inside, you are under a patron. Outside, you are exposed. You let your breathing settle, and you feel the timeline sliding forward again. Next, the wall and the storm will start talking to each other, because when a storm batters a city-state, it does not feel like weather. It feels like politics from the sky. And the gods, already trained to guard gates and boundaries, will soon be trained to smash walls and test them too. For now, you linger in the shade of the gate, listening to the creak of hinges, the murmur of disputes, the soft clink of offerings in a bowl. The city-state keeps drawing lines. The gods keep stepping onto those lines like sentries, and you, drifting through this quiet timeline, begin to understand the simple formula. The more a city defines itself, the more its gods become defined. You stay near the wall as evening returns, because the wall is where you can feel the city's nerves most clearly. In the heat of the day, the bricks soak sunlight like bread soaking broth. Now, as the sun lowers, the bricks release that stored warmth in slow waves, and the air smells like baked clay and dust. The city-state exhales. People move more freely. Children appear again like little proof that the world has not ended today. But the sky is changing, far off, beyond the fields. Clouds are building in layers, darker at the base, bruised purple at the edges. You can feel the temperature dip, a subtle coolness that makes skin tighten. A wind rises, dragging the smell of wetness before a single drop falls. The city-state notices. The city-state always notices. Because the wall is not only a barrier against humans, it is a barrier against fear, and storms have a way of climbing right over fear like it is a low fence. Here comes your mainstream historical fact. Softly but firmly. In ancient Mesopotamia and neighboring regions, storm deities and weather gods play major roles in religious life, often associated with fertility, destruction, kingship, and the power to grant or withhold agricultural success. In a place where crops depend on seasonal rain and floods, the storm is not background. It is a character, and city-states love characters, because characters can be negotiated with. You walk along the inner side of the wall where a few guards are stationed. They are not panicking, but they are attentive. A storm can damage roofs, knock down weak sections, turn lanes into slick channels. Repairs cost labor, labor costs food, food costs stability. The storm is economic, the storm is political. So the city-state gives the storm a face and a name and a shrine, and then pretends it can influence the face with offerings. At a corner where the wall thickens, you find a small platform, maybe a lookout, maybe a ritual spot. There is a little heap of ash, a burned patch. Someone has been making offerings here, right where the wall meets the sky. The logic is simple and ancient. If the storm comes from above, you meet it at the highest point you can. You pause there and listen. The wind slides along the bricks with a low whistle. Somewhere, a loose reed mat flaps like a nervous bird. The city sounds quieter now. People are pulling shutters, tightening ropes, moving animals into shelter. Even the dogs seem less interested in drama. Then the first thunder arrives. Not loud yet, just a distant roll, like a giant shifting in sleep. It echoes across the flat land and arrives at the wall with a soft vibration you can feel through your feet. The guards glance toward the horizon. You glance too, because you are human, and humans have never been chill about thunder. Now you see how the wall shapes the god. A city that lives behind brick will imagine the storm as a force testing that brick. The storm god becomes the one who hurls, who strikes, who proves whether the city deserves to stand. The wall invites a narrative of challenge. We build. The sky responds. We fortify. The thunder laughs. It is a relationship, tense and intimate. This is your quirky tidbit. In some traditions, storms are not only weather but omens, and thunder is read as communication, a sign of divine mood or political fate. People do not just ask. Will it rain? They ask. What does the storm want? When a city-state thinks like this, every lightning flash becomes a headline. Light joke number 1. You know how modern people read meaning into a notification sound and immediately assume the worst? Ancient people hear thunder and go, ah, yes, the sky is subtweeting us again. The wind strengthens. Dust lifts. You taste grit. The wall feels more important with every gust, like it is bracing itself, and the city's relationship with its storm god becomes more obvious. Somewhere, perhaps in the temple, priests are preparing incense, maybe reciting words meant to soothe the divine. Somewhere, a family sets out a small offering on a rooftop, hoping the god will notice their politeness and not drop a lightning bolt on the storage jars. Historians still argue whether the prominence of storm gods in different regions reflects ecological realities most strongly or political ones. Do storm gods rise because weather is central to survival? Or because rulers use the storm's awe to legitimize authority? Again, it is likely a braided answer. The storm is both real and useful. It is the most convincing actor in the sky's theater. The first raindrops strike. They hit the bricks with tiny clicks, then multiply into a soft drumming. The smell changes instantly. Dust becomes damp. The world sharpens. You breathe in that scent of rain on hot clay, and your nervous system relaxes a notch. Because even though storms are scary, rain is also life. The city-state feels it too. There is an almost audible shift from dread to hope. Please be enough. Please be gentle. Please fill the canals without tearing them apart. Lightning forks in the distance, briefly outlining the clouds like torn cloth. Thunder follows. Louder now. The guards tense, hands on spears. Not because they can fight lightning, obviously, but because you do something with your hands when you are helpless. Humans always do. Light joke number 2. The guards gripping spears at the sky is like you yelling at your Wi-Fi router. It does not change the situation, but it feels emotionally necessary. You move along the wall to a place where a newer section meets an older section, and you can see the difference in craftsmanship. The older bricks are worn, settled. The newer ones are sharper, less confident. Rain runs down both. The wall's a patchwork of seasons and emergencies, and the storm is its editor. And that is the point. The storm, God's personality, becomes intertwined with the city's architectural history. If the wall collapses in a storm, the god is angry. If the wall holds, the god is satisfied or merciful. If a lightning strike hits the temple roof, it is a message. The city-state cannot shrug it off as coincidence. City-states are too invested in meaning. A man climbs the steps to the lookout with a small bowl. Even in the rain, he carefully tips a little liquid over the edge, letting it run down the bricks. It could be beer. It could be water mixed with something. The offering is simple, almost desperate. Take this and leave the wall alone. You watch the liquid merge with rainwater and disappear. The gesture feels both humble and transactional. That is how city-states treat gods. Like powerful partners who can be paid in respect. The rain intensifies. Water streams down the wall in thin sheets. In the streets below, people hurry, laughing nervously, shouting to one another. A child squeals and tries to catch raindrops in their mouth, because children are always 1 second away from turning apocalypse into a game. Someone scolds them, but you can hear the smile in the scolding. Then, closer lightning. A flash brightens the world to white for a heartbeat, and thunder follows almost immediately, a crack that makes you flinch. Somewhere in the city, a dog barks like it is personally offended by the sky. You feel the hairs on your arms rise. The storm god is suddenly not a distant concept. The storm god is a presence pressing down on roofs and walls. Light joke number 3. This is the moment you realize that storm deity is not an abstract theology term. It is basically the ancient equivalent of your phone's emergency alert. Except it comes with thunder and existential dread. You shelter under a small overhang near the gate. Rain splashes in. The gate's guardian niche is wet now. The little figure darkened. Slick. The boundary between inside and outside blurs when the storm arrives, because water ignores walls. It seeps. It finds cracks. It makes everything honest. And so, the city-state's gods must handle both defense and vulnerability. The storm god is powerful, but the gate guardian is necessary too, because the storm can bring not only rain, but chaos, damaged homes, displaced people, opportunistic raiders who attack when the city is distracted. A storm is when the outside world tries to slip in. The rain begins to ease after a while, as storms often do, like a tantrum that runs out of energy. The thunder rolls farther away. The wind softens. The city-state emerges cautiously, as if checking whether the sky is truly done. You step out and look along the wall again. Water drips from bricks. Puddles form. The air is cooler. The smell of damp earth rises, and you feel something shift in the city's collective mood. Relief, gratitude, a sense of having passed a test. This is where the storm god becomes not just feared, but honored. People will remember this storm. They will tell stories. They will say the god raged but spared us, or the god warned us, or the god demanded attention. The city-state will weave the event into its identity. And in doing so, it will shape the god's story. You walk slowly back toward the center, the wet streets reflecting lamplight. In your mind, the timeline keeps sliding forward. Soon, writing will pin these stories down. Soon, the storm god will have a name carved in clay. Soon, official myths will explain why the thunder acts like it does. And those myths will serve the city-state's needs. For now, you just listen to the last drops falling from roofs, like tiny punctuation marks on the night. And you feel the wall still standing behind you. Warm and damp, as if it survived not only weather but meaning itself. You walk after the storm like the city does, carefully, with that cautious optimism of someone who has just argued with the sky and somehow lived to tell the tale. Water glistens on everything. The bricks look darker, richer, as if the rain has briefly polished them. Puddles hold upside-down stars. The air smells clean in a way ancient cities rarely manage, and you almost want to congratulate the place, like, wow, you got rinsed and you did not collapse. As you move inward, you notice people repairing small damages. A roof mat is retied. A cracked jar is inspected. Someone sweeps silt back toward the gutter. These are quiet acts of resilience, but you also feel something else happening beneath the repairs. The storm is becoming a story, and stories. In a city-state, our currency, because once the city gets big enough, memory becomes political. You arrive near the temple compound again, and you hear a different kind of sound than hammers and brooms. A scratchy, rhythmic tapping, like a bird pecking. You follow it to a shaded space where someone sits at a low surface with a lump of clay, a stylus made of reed, and the posture of a person who knows their job is more important than anyone wants to admit. The scribe. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this section. Writing in Mesopotamia develops early, with cuneiform emerging from administrative needs like recording goods, labor, and transactions, and later expanding into literary and religious texts. The earliest writing is basically accounting that grows a soul. You watch the scribe press the reed into the clay, leaving little wedge-shaped marks. Each mark is small, but the effect is enormous, because the moment you can record something, you can standardize it. The moment you can standardize it, you can enforce it. And the moment you can enforce it, you can say, this is the way it has always been, even if you invented it last week. The city-state loves that trick. A runner or temple worker brings a small list of items. The scribe nods, makes marks, perhaps stamps a seal. The whole interaction feels calm, but your brain can already see the long-term consequences. The temple as warehouse now has a memory that does not fade with old age. The ruler can now claim continuity. The priesthood can now cite precedent. The god can now speak through recorded decrees. And here is the quiet turn. Writing doesn't just record gods. It creates them in a new way. Before writing, a god is a presence you feel, a story you hear, a ritual you do. It is flexible, like a song that changes slightly depending on who sings it. After writing, the god becomes fixed. The god gets an official version. The god becomes something you can point to. Like, no, it says right here the god prefers this offering, on this day, in this order. And if you mess it up, do not look at me. Blame the clay. Light joke number 1. The first time someone writes down a ritual and calls it correct, you can practically hear the universe sigh, because now there will be paperwork forever. You lean closer, fascinated by the marks. The scribe's hands are steady. The clay is damp, cool. He works quickly, but not sloppily. Mistakes matter. Mistakes are not just personal embarrassment. Mistakes can mean misallocated grain, offended patrons, or disputes that spiral into violence. Writing is an authority technology, and scribes become quiet power brokers. And that, naturally, shapes the gods. If scribes are attached to temples, and temples belong to gods, then literacy becomes sacred. The ability to read and write becomes a kind of priestly magic. The god is no longer only in the sky or the storm. The god is also on the tablet. The god is in the archive. This is your quirky tidbit. In some ancient traditions, written words and names are treated as having power in themselves. So knowing a deity's true name or writing it correctly can feel like handling a potent substance. A name is not just a label. It is a handle. And if you can hold a god by the name, you feel slightly less helpless. You can see the city-state leaning into that feeling. People like handles. People like levers. People like anything that makes the world seem movable. Historians still argue whether the transition from oral myth to written myth reduces variation and freezes belief, or whether it simply creates new layers of variation. With different schools and cities producing competing versions, because yes, even in ancient times, you get the equivalent of, my source says your version is wrong. Writing does not eliminate debate. It gives debate sharper teeth. You follow the scribe as he carries a tablet toward storage, where tablets are kept like treasures. The room is cool and shadowed. There are stacks, Shelves, baskets filled with clay documents. It feels like entering the city's mind. Every tablet is a thought preserved, a promise, a debt, a prayer, a claim. Now imagine the gods in this environment. A god who is written down becomes more complex. The god gets genealogies, titles, epithets. The god acquires history. The god gets a portfolio that can be referenced. This god did this in the old days. The city-state can now use the past as a tool, and the gods become the most useful past of all. You step out into the courtyard where the air is warmer, and you hear someone reciting. A voice, slow and rhythmic. A small group listens. You realize you are witnessing another shift. Stories are being performed alongside writing. Oral tradition does not vanish. It becomes supplemented, supported, sometimes controlled. The reciter speaks of a storm, a flood, a divine judgment, perhaps echoing the recent weather. The listeners nod, murmuring. The story turns a chaotic event into a meaningful narrative. It says, "The storm happened because of something, and if we do this, it will not happen again." The story gives anxiety a shape. That is half of religion. If we are being honest, like joke number 2, the ancient city-state is basically saying, we need a post-storm debrief, and the gods are the management team in the meeting. Everyone is tired. Everyone is pretending they learned a lesson. You wander past a shrine where a symbol is painted. Someone has refreshed the pigment recently. The color pops against wet brick. You think about how writing and art are cousins here. Both are ways to make meaning visible. Both are ways to claim permanence. If a symbol is painted, it can be seen by anyone passing. If a name is written, it can be remembered by anyone who can read, which is fewer people. But those people tend to matter. The city-state does not need everyone to read. It only needs the right people to read. And those right people can shape theology with frightening efficiency. They can decide which god is central. They can decide which myth is official. They can decide which ritual is correct. They can decide which divine story supports the ruler's policy and which one mysteriously stops being recited. You sit briefly near a wall that is still damp. You let the warmth of the bricks seep into your back. The sounds of the courtyard blur into a soothing wash. Murmurs, distant footsteps, the faint clink of tools. Your mind slows, and you realize this is the exact atmosphere where myths harden into truth. Not because someone is forcing belief with a whip, but because everyone wants stability. And stability loves a script. Light joke number 3. Once the gods are written down, you cannot just say, "I heard it differently." Someone will pull out a tablet like an ancient screenshot and go. Actually, you follow a temple worker carrying a small tablet to a spot near the altar. The worker sets it down briefly, perhaps as a record of an offering. The act feels profound in a quiet way. It is like the god is being given a receipt. The divine relationship is becoming documented. The city-state is turning spirituality into administration, and administration into spirituality. You look up at the sky again. The clouds have thinned. The stars are coming back. Somewhere, the moon is rising, pale and patient, and you realize that writing also changes the way people see the heavens. Once you can record observations, you can compare them. Once you can compare them, you can predict. Once you can predict, you can claim that prediction is divinely granted. The city-state begins to weave an ever tighter net of meaning, a net that holds people together, a net that also catches them. As night settles, the scribe's lamps are lit again. The city-state continues to press marks into clay. Each wedge is small, but together they become a force. And the gods, once fluid as wind, begin to become durable, official, city-branded. The city-state does not just worship them, it publishes them. You drift away from the temple, back into the lanes, with the feeling that the next step is inevitable. Once gods can be written, they can be traded, argued over, adopted, or imposed. Once myths are portable, war and diplomacy will start moving divine names across borders, and you can almost hear the future rustling like clay drying. Treaties, conquered cities, swapped pantheons, gods traveling unwillingly like prisoners and willingly like merchants. The city-state has given the gods permanence. Now it will give them passports. You leave the scribal courtyard with that slightly dizzy feeling you get after staring too long at tiny marks. Like your brain has been quietly reorganized. The city is settling into night again, but it is not a peaceful, isolated night. In a city-state world, even sleep has borders. Even dreams have neighbors. You walk toward the gate area, because gates are where you can feel the outside world pressing in. The air here is cooler. The bricks hold the day's warmth, but the wind steals it. Torches flicker, and the guards' shadows stretch tall, making them look more heroic than they probably feel. Beyond the wall, the darkness is wide and full of possibilities, which is a polite way to say trouble. You hear it before you see it. A low rumble of voices, a clink of metal, the restless shifting of animals. A small group is arriving, not a caravan of friendly trade, but something sharper. Messengers, maybe. Soldiers, maybe. People with that tense posture of those who travel armed because they expect the world to misbehave. The gate opens just enough. Words are exchanged. A symbol is shown. The group is allowed inside. And your mainstream historical fact for this section comes in like a quiet drumbeat. Mesopotamian and broader Near Eastern city-states often engage in conflict and diplomacy, with alliances, wars, and treaties that can involve religious elements such as oath made in the names of gods and the recognition of deities across city boundaries. Politics and religion are not separate departments. They share the same building. You follow the newcomers into a courtyard near the gate, where city officials or temple representatives meet them. There is no banquet, no singing, just the clipped tone of negotiation. Something is happening between this city and another city. Maybe a border dispute, maybe a stolen shipment, maybe a demand for tribute, maybe a marriage alliance being discussed like a contract. You notice that whenever someone wants to make a point stick, they invoke the gods. Not in a preachy way, but like citing the strongest authority available by the god of this city. By the God who sees all, may the god strike the lyre. These are not poetic flourishes. They are enforcement tools. In a world without international courts, the gods are the court. And here's where city-states start shaping gods into diplomats and weapons. A city's patron deity becomes part of its foreign policy. If you are negotiating with another city-state, you do not only talk about canals and trade routes, you talk about whose god is acknowledged, whose god is honored, whose god is superior. Sometimes you treat each other's gods with respect like you would treat each other's rulers. Sometimes you refuse, which is basically a divine insult. Light joke number 1. Imagine showing up to a meeting and saying, "I respect your manager." And they reply, "My manager could eat your manager." That is what divine diplomacy can sound like when city-states get spicy. You drift closer and hear a treaty being discussed, or at least the outline of one. There is talk of boundaries. There is talk of, if you do this, we do this. There is talk of consequences. Then, the sacred part. Someone mentions an oath, a promise sealed not only by words but by divine witness. If the oath is broken, the gods will punish. And this is where writing from the last section matters. Once you can write treaties down, you can store them, refer back to them, and claim legitimacy. The gods become not only witnesses, but signatories in spirit. Your quirky tidbit for tonight is a bit deliciously unsettling. Conquered cities sometimes have their divine statues or symbols taken away by victors, not merely as loot, but as a way of demonstrating that the defeated god has abandoned or been captured. In some traditions, returning a deity's image can be a political gesture, like repatriating a hostage. Yes, gods can become bargaining chips. Light joke number 2. Your city loses a war, and suddenly your god is relocating for career opportunities. That is one way to spin it, I guess. You feel the tension in your chest as you imagine what it means for ordinary people. If your patron deity is taken, what happens to your sense of safety? The temple is still there. The warehouse still holds grain. The wall still stands. But the story that binds it all feels cracked. City-states understand this, which is why gods become central to morale. A city does not just defend its land. It defends its divine identity. Historians still argue whether the spread and blending of deities across regions occurs mainly through peaceful cultural exchange or through coercion and conquest. Some gods travel because merchants carry them, because intermarriage links households, because stories drift like pollen. Other gods travel because armies drag them, because treaties enforce worship, because victors impose their pantheon as a stamp of dominance. In reality, it is a messy mix, and messy mixes are basically the ancient world's favorite aesthetic. You watch the officials gesture toward the temple district, and the newcomers follow. It is late, but a small ritual is prepared, maybe an offering to honor the agreement, maybe a symbolic meal. You walk behind them, and you notice how the city's mood changes. People peek from doorways. Whispers ripple. The presence of outsiders is always interesting, but it is also always a question. Do they respect our God? At the temple courtyard, incense is lit. The smell curls upward, sweet and sharp. A priest appears, wearing signs of office, and the priest's voice is calm. Practiced, the priest speaks not only to the visitors, but to the god. It is like hosting guests and informing the owner at the same time. The visitors offer something, a token, a small animal, a libation. They do it carefully, because doing it wrong would be an insult. And this is the heart of the section. City-states shape gods into negotiators by making worship part of diplomacy. If you want peace, you honor each other's divine patrons. If you want alliance, you swear by multiple gods. If you want intimidation, you boast that your god will crush theirs. Light joke number 3. It is like every treaty comes with a required tag the gods clause, because without divine tagging, the agreement does not count. You linger near the edge of the ritual, watching faces in the flickering light. Some locals look proud, some look wary, some look bored. Because even sacred diplomacy can be tedious when you have chores tomorrow. A child yawns. A god shifts weight from foot to foot. Life continues while gods are invoked. And the gods, invoked this way, begin to change. They become more than local protectors. They become players in a network. They get compared, equated, merged. Your storm god is like our storm god. Your goddess of love resembles ours. These comparisons make the divine world more portable. They also make it political, because if gods can be equated, then a powerful city can claim its god as the universal one. You can almost see pantheons reshuffling like pieces on a board. A city is conquered and its deity is absorbed into the victor's system, maybe reduced in status, may be reinterpreted as a local form of a greater god. or a city wins prestige, and suddenly its patron deity gains popularity elsewhere. The divine becomes a reflection of shifting power. The ritual ends. The visitors are escorted to lodging. The officials disperse. The courtyard empties, but the implications hang in the air like incense residue. Gods can cross borders now, not just as vague ideas, but as named, written, treaty-bound presences. You walk back toward the gate, and you notice the boundary again, that thin line between inside and outside. In earlier sections, the boundary is about protection. Now it is about exchange, goods, people, and gods moving through. And as you watch the gate close, you feel the timeline tugging forward once more. The next step is inevitable. Merchants will take over where diplomats and soldiers started. Trade routes will make gods travel in quieter ways, slipping into taverns and markets, becoming lucky charms for people who spend their lives on roads. Because once a god has been invoked in a treaty, why not in a trade deal? Once a god has been honored by outsiders, why not carried by them? City-states have taught the divine to be local. Now the world is teaching the divine to move. You exhale, slow, and let the night fold around you like a cloak, while somewhere in the distance an owl calls, and the city-state sleeps with one eye half open, dreaming of both war and agreement, and of gods who can be captured, shared, and negotiated with like the most powerful names in any contract. You keep circling back to the market district the way a moth keeps returning to a lamp. Not because you are reckless, but because markets are where a city-state's soul gets loud. The gate closed behind you earlier with that final wooden thud, but trade never really closes. It just changes its clothing. By day it is shouting and bargaining. By night it becomes murmurs, clinking jars, and the soft pad of someone moving contraband fish like it is a sacred mission. You follow the smell first: roasted grain, onion, dried dates, animal fat cooling on a stone. The air is warmer here because bodies gather, and where bodies gather, stories gather too. A market is not only goods, it is gossip, alliances, rivalries, and that special human sport of pretending you just happened to have exactly what the other person needs. You pass stalls that are little more than mats on the ground. Others have wooden frames. A potter stacks bowls, tapping each one lightly to check the sound. A metalworker displays a few small tools that catch lamplight like tiny moons. Somewhere, someone is pouring beer, and the smell is sour-sweet, comforting in a "this could go badly, but we are doing it anyway" sort of way. Here is your mainstream historical fact for tonight. In ancient Mesopotamian city-states, long-distance trade becomes increasingly important for acquiring resources not available locally, such as timber, stone, and metals, and merchants operate within networks that connect cities across regions. When your land is rich in mud and grain, but poor in metal and hardwood, you either trade or you stay primitive. City-states choose trade, and trade needs protection that can travel. You feel that shift immediately. The gods you met earlier are rooted: temple owners, gate guardians, storm managers, scribal authorities. They are local, anchored to walls and storerooms. But here in the market, you sense a different kind of prayer in the air. It is lighter, more personal, less official. A merchant cannot rely only on a city's patron deity, because the merchant leaves the city. The merchant sleeps on roads. The merchant crosses borders. The merchant needs a god who can fit in a pocket. You stop near a stall where small objects are laid out: beads, carved stones, amulets. A trader holds one up between thumb and forefinger. It is simple, maybe a little rough, but it has presence. The trader murmurs something like a blessing, a phrase you do not fully catch. and sells it with the confidence of someone selling a lifeline. This is your quirky tidbit. Many ancient travelers and traders carry personal protective items, including amulets and small figurines, believing they offer luck, ward off evil, or attract favorable outcomes, especially on dangerous journeys. It is not superstition in their minds. It is insurance. Light joke number 1. You know how people today won't board a plane without triple-checking their passport and then still pat their pocket every 5 minutes? Ancient merchants do the same thing, except the passport is a tiny charm and the border agent is fate. You wander past a cluster of men huddled around a low table, drinking. Their laughter is quiet, tired, and a little sharp at the edges. Road laughter, the kind that says, "We made it here, and tomorrow we might not." They talk about routes, about bandits, about a city 2 days away that is difficult, which is merchant code for they will absolutely try to overcharge you. You hear someone mention a god's name like a lucky phrase, tossed into conversation the way you might say, "knock on wood," and you realize the timeline is doing something clever. The gods are becoming social tools at a personal scale. In temples, gods legitimize systems. In markets, gods soothe nerves. You move deeper into the market where a caravan has set up. Pack animals stand with heavy loads, their sides rising and falling like bellows. The smell of sweat and leather hangs in the air. A merchant kneels and checks a seal on a bundle, then looks up and catches your eye, as if you, stranger, might be the universe testing him. He mutters under his breath, and you recognize the shape of a prayer, even if you cannot translate it. Please let this be honest. Please let this be fair. Please let me survive. Oh, historians still argue whether the spread of certain deities across regions is driven more by merchant networks and everyday mobility or by state-sponsored religion and conquest. You can feel both forces in the market air. Merchants quietly carry names and symbols from city to city, and those names stick because they solve a problem. Fear on the road, uncertainty in bargains, the dizzying sensation of being outside your own walls. A god that travels becomes a god of thresholds, luck, and negotiation. You see it in the way deals are made. Two traders face each other. They measure goods carefully. They argue. They laugh. They pretend they are offended. Then one of them spits lightly to the side. Not rude, more like a gesture, and touches a small charm at their neck. The other nods as if acknowledging an invisible witness. The bargain is not only between two humans, it is between two reputations, two sets of supernatural expectations. If you cheat, you do not only risk being caught, you risk being cursed. And in a world this precarious, a curse is basically a psychological debt you cannot afford. Light joke number 2, the ancient version of "my lawyer will be in touch" is "my God will remember." And honestly, that is a terrifying customer service policy. You linger near a tavern-like space where smoke escapes through an opening in the roof. Inside, the air is thick with warmth and voices. Someone plays a simple rhythm on a drum or taps a cup against a table. A traveler tells a story about a narrow escape, about a bridge that almost collapsed, about wolves or thieves or a sandstorm. Every listener leans in, not just for entertainment, but for survival tips disguised as drama. And in every story, the gods show up. A traveler says they offered a little beer to the roadside spirit and then the storm shifted. Another says they wore a charm and the bandits chose a different victim. A third says they swore an oath at a shrine and the deal turned out honest. These are not grand myths carved in temple archives. These are street-level miracles, small and portable, the kind that spread fast because they are useful. You step back out, letting the cooler air wash you. You look around the market and notice how it functions like a crossroads of divine branding. A potter from one city uses a symbol you recognize from a different region. A necklace carries a motif that suggests a foreign goddess. A merchant mutters a blessing that sounds like a name you heard near the gate during diplomacy. The pantheon is mixing, not in a tidy, official way, but in a chaotic, human way, like spices spilling into each other on a busy counter. And city-states, ironically, help this happen. The city-state creates the gods as local patrons, but the city-state also creates the surplus, the specialization, the need for external materials, and therefore the trade that moves those gods. It is like inventing a pet and then being surprised when it learns to roam. You pause at a store where a woman sells small clay plaques with simple raised images, a protective figure, maybe a symbol that looks like a star. She explains something with her hands, and the buyer nods, pressing the plaque to their forehead briefly in a gesture of respect. You can almost hear the logic. If the road is dangerous, carry a piece of home with you. If home has a god, carry a piece of the god. Light joke number 3. It is the ancient equivalent of putting a good vibes only sticker on your suitcase. Except here, good vibes is a divine being with opinions and a potential temper. You walk toward the edge of the market where merchants prepare to sleep near their goods, because theft is a constant predator. They wrap themselves in blankets, tuck valuables close, and place charms nearby like tiny guards. You look at their faces, relaxed but alert, and you understand something soft and sad. Traveling people cannot afford the full comfort of a city's walls, so they manufacture comfort in other ways. They make luck tangible. They make protection portable. And in doing that, they reshape the gods again. A god that travels must be less territorial, or at least it must be willing to visit other territories without starting a cosmic fist fight. Some gods become associated with roads, crossroads, markets, messages. Some become patrons of weights and measures, because trade loves fairness and fears cheating. Some become gods of safe passage, the divine equivalent of a well-lit path. You let your eyes drift upward. Above the market rooftops, the stars hang steady, the same stars every traveler uses to orient, the same stars watched by temple astronomers. Yet here, the stars are not a priest's schedule. They are a merchant's map. Different needs, different divine flavors. You start to feel the next turn of the timeline in your bones. Once gods move with merchants, they enter households more easily. They slide into daily life. They become fashionable, useful, sometimes even trendy in the ancient way. And as priesthoods notice, they will try to organize this chaos, to claim authority over which traveling gods are legitimate, which charms are proper, which rituals are acceptable. Because nothing says institution like trying to manage what people do when they are scared. You breathe in the last lingering scents of the market, warm bread and smoke and animal musk, and you drift away into quieter streets, carrying with you the sense that the gods have started walking, not only in stories or treaties, but in pockets, necklaces, and whispered blessings exchanged over barley and bronze. And somewhere ahead, you can already smell the next section, incense heavier, voices more formal, the quiet power struggle of priests learning that portable gods are great for business, but terrible for control. You drift away from the market's last warm pockets of laughter and into streets that smell cleaner, sharper, more intentional. The air changes as you approach the temple district. Out there, trade is messy and loud and full of improvisation. Here, everything feels curated, even the silence seems arranged, like it was swept into place with a reed broom. Torches burn in brackets along the walls, and the flames do not flicker wildly the way they do in the market. The brackets are placed with purpose. The doors are taller, the brickwork is thicker, more confident, less patched. You feel it in your body. This is not a place where you haggle. This is a place where you lower your voice. Incense curls from a doorway and spills into the street. It's sweet and resinous. A smell that sits at the back of your throat and tells your nervous system, behave. You follow it because humans are basically moths, and incense is the ancient version of a "come here" sign. Inside the courtyard, the world becomes soft-edged. The light is warmer. The ground is swept. A few people move quietly, carrying small bowls, folded cloth, bundles of reeds. Their steps are measured. You notice the way they hold objects, not like stuff, but like things that matter. A priest passes you, and even the priest's breathing seems controlled, as if the lungs have been trained. Here comes your mainstream historical fact, laid down like a brick. In many city-states of the ancient Near East, priesthoods become organized institutions attached to temples, managing rituals, offerings, temple property, and sometimes significant economic resources and labor. In other words, priests are not only spiritual guides, they are administrators with incense. And administration has a smell. Apparently, you watch a small ritual being prepared. A cloth is spread, a bowl is placed, a little oil is poured, glinting like captured lamplight. Someone sprinkles something powdered, maybe herbs, maybe crushed resin. The scent thickens. It clings to the skin. It makes you feel like you are being coated in seriousness. This is not the market's portable luck charm vibe. This is official. A temple singer or reciter begins a low chant, not loud enough to perform for the street, but loud enough to anchor the space. You feel the chant vibrating in your ribs. The words are ancient to you, but the effect is universal. It turns attention into a single direction. It turns many minds into one mood, and that is power. You notice the hierarchy the way you notice gravity. Some people move freely, giving instructions. Others move carefully, waiting to be told. One person carries a tall vessel and doesn't even glance around, because they are in the zone. Another stands near the entry, watching who comes and goes. The temple is a building, yes, but it is also a machine with roles. And once roles exist, someone controls the roles. Light joke number 1. You can tell this is an institution because there are people whose entire job seems to be standing in the right place looking important, which is a job description that somehow survives all of history. You wander toward a storeroom door, and you remember the earlier scent of barley and clay seals. That smell is still here, but it's been upgraded. There are more seals, more baskets, more order. The temple is not only collecting offerings now, it is managing them. It is deciding what becomes sacrifice, what becomes rations, what becomes trade goods, what becomes reserves. And as the temple's role grows, the god's role grows too. The god becomes not only an owner, but a brand. The god becomes the reason the temple's decisions are legitimate. You watch a priest bless a shipment, speaking over it as if words can wrap it in protection. A scribe stands nearby, tablet in hand, recording. A worker waits to carry the goods deeper into storage. It's a whole supply chain, but with perfume. This is where you feel the tension of the age. Portable gods have been spreading through markets and travel routes, and the temple is responding by tightening its grip. People can whisper to a charm on the road. Sure, but the temple can say, that's not the correct way. The temple can say, the god prefers this ritual. The temple can say, bring your offering here to the proper place, and we will make sure it counts. The city-state is shaping the gods into management, not the fun kind, the clipboard kind. Your quirky tidbit for tonight slips in through a side doorway. In many traditions, temples employ specialists for music, incense preparation, purification, and even the care of the deity's cult image, including washing, dressing, and presenting it as if it were a living presence. The god is treated like a high-status resident with a daily routine. It is both intimate and theatrical, and it reinforces the idea that the deity truly lives here. You glimpse a curtained inner area where attendants move in and out. You don't see the central cult image clearly, but you sense it. The space feels charged. People approach it differently, slower, like they're walking into a room where someone powerful is sleeping. A priest emerges with hands freshly washed, and you catch the faint smell of clean water mixed with something floral. The god has been tended. Light joke number 2. Imagine being a divine being of cosmic power, and your daily schedules includes bath, outfit change, perfume, public appearance. Honestly, the god's morning routine is more demanding than yours, and you still forget to drink water. Outside the inner area, the temple courtyard hosts a small gathering. Some are city officials, some are wealthy donors, some are regular people bringing offerings, a bit of grain, a small animal, a woven cloth. Their faces show a familiar mix: hope, fear, obligation, and the quiet desire to be noticed by something larger. And this is where priests become crucial. They are translators between ordinary people and divine authority. They know the words, they know the timings, they know which offering matches which request. In a city-state, knowledge becomes leverage, and priestly knowledge becomes an entire form of governance. You stand near a group of novices or lower-ranked attendants who whisper to one another while watching the senior priests. They mimic gestures. They learn the choreography. You can feel the institution reproducing itself. This is how priesthoods professionalize, through training, lineage, and control of access. Historians still argue whether temple institutions primarily stabilize city-states through resource management and shared ritual, or whether they also intensify inequality by concentrating wealth and authority under sacred legitimacy. You can see both in the same courtyard. The temple feeds people, organizes labor, and provides social glue. The temple also decides who gets close to the god, who gets the best cuts of meat, who gets employed, who gets heard. The incense keeps drifting, softening the edges of your thoughts. You watch a priest lift a bowl and pour libation, and the movement is slow enough to feel like time is being managed. The gods are no longer only wild forces. They are scheduled. A bell-like sound rings, maybe a metal chime, and people shift position. The ritual is moving to its next stage. You notice how the crowd follows cues almost automatically, like a flock turning. This isn't mindlessness. It's trust in procedure. Procedure feels safe. Procedure feels like a wall you can carry inside your chest. You glance at the temple entrance where 2 attendants control the flow of people. They look calm, but firm. The temple is open, yet not open. Access is a privilege. That privilege creates desire. Desire creates loyalty. Loyalty creates donations. Donations create more incense. It's a beautiful loop. Really, if you ignore the part where it quietly controls you. Light joke number 3. You can always tell you're in a serious institution when the scent is expensive and the rules are invisible, but somehow you're already breaking 3 of them just by standing incorrectly. You move to a side wall where offerings are stacked, and you see the variety: small, humble gifts and larger, showier ones. The showier ones are placed with care. Visible, you feel the subtle social performance. Giving to the god is also giving to the city's central institution, its reputation, It's security. It's insurance again, but with witnesses. And now you understand the turning point. The portable gods of the road have been comforting because they're personal. The temple gods are different. They are civic. They belong to the city-state's identity and administration. The priesthood's job is to keep that civic identity coherent, especially as trade, war, and travel keep bringing in new names and symbols. So the priesthood absorbs some things, labels others foreign, and occasionally declares a tidy hierarchy. This god is major, that god is minor. This ritual is correct, that one is questionable. The divine world starts looking like an organized chart, and the city-state sighs in relief because charts are easier than chaos. You step back out into the street, and the incense clings to your hair and clothes like a gentle reminder that the temple is not just a building. It's a system that reaches into daily life. You can feel it trailing behind you as you walk, like the city-state's hand on your shoulder, steering you, and you sense where the timeline is gliding next. Because once priesthoods shape gods into institutions, those gods start shaping how people think about love, fertility, and reputation. The most intimate parts of life will become civic concerns, because city-states can't resist managing what keeps them populated, stable, and proud. You breathe out slowly, letting the incense-heavy air fade into the cooler night, and you keep walking, already feeling the next divine shift waiting in the shadows, tender and political at the same time. You wander away from the temple district with incense still clinging to you. That sticky, sweet reminder that institutions can perfume themselves until you forget they are institutions. The streets ahead are narrower, more domestic, and the city-state feels softer here, not less controlled, just more intimate. You hear a lullaby through a doorway. You catch the scent of stew. You pass a courtyard where someone is combing hair by lamplight. Slow strokes like a ritual of calm. This is where the city's biggest secret lives. It is built on private bodies. You pause near a house where women are gathered, speaking quietly. Their hands move as they talk, weaving, sorting, preparing. One laughs, and the laugh is small but real. Another shushes her, half playful, half anxious, as if even joy might tempt bad luck. A younger woman stands with her palms on her belly, breathing carefully. Her face is focused in that way that says she's carrying more than a child. She's carrying the city's future. Here is your mainstream historical fact for tonight. Fertility, childbirth, and family life are central concerns in ancient urban societies. And many cultures develop prominent deities and rituals connected to love, sexuality, marriage, pregnancy, and protection of mothers and infants. When survival depends on population and labor, reproduction becomes a public interest even when it happens behind closed doors. City-states cannot resist turning the private into civic. You feel it immediately in the way the women speak of offerings. Not grand sacrifices, not temple processions, but small, careful acts. A little oil at a household shrine, a whispered prayer at dusk, a charm tied around the wrist. Love and fertility deities are often approached not only in formal spaces, but in bedrooms, kitchens, courtyards, the places where life actually happens. And here is where city-states shape divine femininity and divine romance. They turn love into reputation and fertility into policy. You walk on and see a small shrine niche in a wall, painted bright even in low light, a symbol of a goddess, a star, a flower, a stylized shape that hints at beauty and power. Someone has placed a garland of dried plants there. The offering is humble but intentional. It says, "Please let the marriage be peaceful." Please, let the baby arrive safely. Please, let desire not turn into disaster. Your quirky tidbit for the section: some ancient love and fertility goddesses carry a surprisingly fierce side in myth and ritual, blending sensuality with warfare or political power, reminding you that love in a city-state is not just romance. It is alliances, inheritance, lineage, and control of property. The goddess of love can also be the goddess of consequences. Light joke number 1. If you think modern relationships are complicated, imagine dating in a city-state where your love life is also a civic project and the goddess is basically monitoring your situationship for economic stability. You pass a doorway where an older woman is sprinkling water on the threshold, murmuring. She looks up briefly, sees you, and nods as if you are just another passerby in the river of the city. The gesture is protective, but it's also social. A clean threshold, a blessed doorway, a healthy household. These are signals. They tell neighbors, we are respectable, we are stable. We are part of the city's moral fabric, and that moral fabric is shaped by gods. The temple institution from before might try to keep rituals centralized, but love and fertility rituals leak outward into households because they have to. No one wants to wait for a priest's schedule when a labor pain begins at midnight. No one wants to file a request form for passion. Humans are impatient, and the gods, conveniently, are everywhere. Still, city-states want to claim a stake in these gods. Because if a goddess blesses marriages, she also blesses inheritance lines. If she blesses fertility, she blesses workforce. If she blesses desire, she influences social stability. The city-state starts telling stories about what kinds of love are acceptable, what kinds of sexuality are dangerous, what kinds of family structure are honorable, and the gods become the mouthpiece for those stories. You drift toward a small public square where a few young men are talking, posturing lightly. They glance at a group of young women passing, and the whole scene is so timeless it almost makes you smile. Then you remember the stakes here. Marriage is not only romance, it is resources. It is alliances between households. It is who gets grain when times are tight. It is who has claim to land. In a city-state, love is never only between two people, it is between families. And families are political units. Historians still argue whether the prominence of certain goddesses reflects genuine reverence for feminine power in society, or whether it serves to channel and control that power through sanctioned ritual and myth. In other words, is the goddess empowering women? Or is she being used as a tool to define what proper womanhood looks like? The answer is complicated. And the city-state loves complicated rules because complicated rules make it hard to rebel. You turn down a lane and hear music, faint but lively. A small celebration is happening. A wedding, perhaps. You see lanterns hung, simple decorations. People are gathered, eating and drinking. The singer's voice rises and falls. The bride is veiled, or at least partially covered, and her posture is rigid with nerves. The groom looks proud and terrified, which is honestly the correct emotional cocktail. A priest or elder leads a small blessing. The name of a love deity is invoked. People cheer softly. Someone tosses a handful of grain, a symbol of abundance. The ritual is both intimate and public. It is a community witnessing a union that will affect the city's future. Light joke number 2. Imagine having your marriage blessed by a goddess who is also known for dramatic, mythic breakups. It is like asking a celebrity for relationship advice. Except the celebrity is divine and has lightning on speed dial. You notice offerings placed at the edge of the celebration. Small bowls, sweets, a bit of incense, even here, outside the formal temple. The ritual language is familiar. The city-state's religion has seeped into social life so thoroughly that you can barely separate them. The gods are the soundtrack. You walk past the celebration and feel a different mood in a side alley. Quiet, tense. A woman sitting alone with her head bowed. Perhaps she is grieving a child. Perhaps she fears infertility. Perhaps she is trapped in a marriage that feels like a cage. The city-state's love gods are not only about joy, they're about longing and pressure and shame. When the city defines successful households, those who do not fit the ideal can feel exposed. And that exposure is why love and fertility deities become so emotionally charged. People cling to them. They bargain with them. They blame them. They ask for miracles in whispers that barely move the air. You look up at rooftops where small household shrines sit, barely visible from the street. A little clay figure, a painted symbol, a bowl left out overnight. These are private negotiations with the divine, happening in parallel across the city like 1,000 quiet conversations. Like joke number 3, the city-state is basically running a massive group project called Keep Humans Alive, and everyone is secretly de-murming the goddess-like. Hey, can you prioritize my request? As you continue, you notice how the Temple District's authority still reaches here. Certain days are considered auspicious for marriage. Certain rituals are deemed correct. Certain offerings are recommended. The priesthood's management style tries to standardize even intimacy. But households adapt. They blend. They improvise. And the gods, shaped by these domestic needs, become more approachable, more personal, yet they also become symbols of civic identity. A city might pride itself on being under the protection of a particular goddess, claiming she makes its people fertile, its marriages strong, its reputation radiant. In that way, divine love becomes civic image. The city-state brand includes not only walls and markets, but we are blessed. You feel the timeline nudging forward again. Once gods are tied to childbirth and marriage, the next inevitable step is dealing with what happens when life ends. Because city-states cannot stop at beginnings, they must also shape endings. They must create underworlds that make death less disruptive to order. You slow your pace, letting the domestic sounds fade into a gentle hush. Somewhere, a baby cries and is soothed. Somewhere, a couple argues and then softens. Somewhere, a woman whispers to a goddess in the dark, asking for safety, asking for love, asking for a future, and the city-state, through all those small private prayers, keeps shaping the gods into companions for the most human moments, while quietly, steadily turning those moments into part of its grand civic machine. You keep walking until the lanes thin out and the city's noise becomes a background murmur, like a sea you can't quite see but always hear. The air cools again. The smell changes too. Less cooking, less sweat, more dust, stone, and something faintly metallic, like earth that has been opened and closed too many times. You know where you are without anyone telling you. You've reached the places the city tries not to think about during daylight, the edge spaces, the quiet corners, the burial grounds, the spots where grief is stored the way grain is stored, carefully, so it doesn't spill everywhere and ruin daily life. Here is your mainstream historical fact, folded gently into the dark. In ancient urban societies, burial practices and beliefs about death and the afterlife develop in ways that reflect social structure, religious tradition, and community identity, with the dead often buried in or near settlements and remembered through ritual. City-states don't just manage water and grain. They manage loss, because unmanaged grief is chaos. You step closer to a low cluster of tombs or burial markers. Simple shapes at first, then more elaborate ones as you move along. Some graves are humble, barely marked. Others have small offerings placed nearby, a bowl, a bead, a bit of food that has gone dry. The gestures are quiet, but they're also stubborn. Humans cannot stop loving the people they lose, so they keep leaving little pieces of life behind. And city-states, anxious as always, need a story that keeps the dead from haunting the streets. So they develop underworlds, not because they enjoy spooky lore, but because an underworld is a civic solution. It gives the dead an address. It gives death a system. It reduces the sense that the invisible is randomly wandering. You pause at a small shrine near the burial area, where a symbol is scratched into stone. The symbol is simple, but it feels heavy. Someone has burned incense here too. Though the scent is faint, older, a wind stirs, carrying a dry rustle through weeds, and you imagine how a city-state hears that sound and thinks, spirits. This is your quirky tidbit for the section. In some ancient traditions, the boundary between the living and the dead is considered thin at certain places and times, and people perform small rituals like pouring libations or leaving food to appease or care for ancestors and restless spirits. It's less horror movie and more, please stay calm, we're still family. Light joke number 1. The ancient version of checking in on relatives sometimes includes literally feeding them through the ground, which makes modern family dinners seem a lot less stressful. Honestly, you walk slowly among the graves and you notice patterns. Some families bury their dead under house floors or near their homes. Others use communal spaces. Either way, the dead are not fully separate from the living. They're integrated, but managed, like a quiet neighborhood where everyone agrees not to bring up certain topics at the wrong time. That integration shapes the gods too. An underworld god or goddess becomes essential. A psychopomp figure, a guide of souls, becomes useful. A city-state that likes order will imagine death as a journey with checkpoints, rules, and consequences. Because if even the afterlife has rules, then the city's rule-following feels cosmic. Historians still argue whether beliefs about the afterlife in early city-states are primarily shaped by inherited rural traditions or by urban administrative thinking that turns everything into a structured realm. Some scholars suggest the bleakness or severity of certain underworld concepts reflects the harshness of life itself, while others emphasize how myths serve social control. Teaching people to respect taboos and rituals. You can feel the tension just standing here. Grief wants comfort, but the city-state wants stability. You stop at a grave where someone has left a small clay cup. It is cracked, but placed carefully. A bit of dried bread sits beside it. This offering is not for show. It's for the dead, or for the spirit, or for whatever the living believe continues. And in that belief, you feel tenderness. The city-state might be an institution machine, but the people inside it are still just people. Aching, you glance back toward the city wall. It rises in the distance like a steady line. The wall keeps threats out, but it cannot keep death out. Death enters through every door without knocking. So the city-state must do something else. It must make death predictable in story, if not in reality. You imagine how the underworld is described. Often it is a place of dust and shadow, where the dead exist in a diminished way, not always comforting, but at least consistent. A consistent afterlife is a kind of peace, because it removes the fear of random haunting. The dead go somewhere. They belong somewhere. That somewhere becomes part of the divine map. Light joke number 2. The city-state can't help itself. Even the afterlife gets zoning laws. Spirits this way, ancestors that way. Please do not loiter near the gate. You notice a boundary marker at the edge of the burial ground, like a line saying, "Living City ends here." Beyond this point, you behave differently. You lower your voice. You don't laugh as loudly. You don't run. The boundary is social as much as physical. And again, boundaries shape gods. If the boundary between life and death is important, there will be a deity who guards it, monitors it, enforces it. The gate guardian now has a cousin in the underworld. As you walk, you hear a soft chant from a distance, a small funeral gathering, perhaps. People are carrying a wrapped body, not in gory detail, just in the quiet weight of it. Their faces are blank with shock, or pinched with grief, or calm in that strange way people get when they're trying to survive their own emotions. A priest or elder speaks words that sound formal. Practiced, ritual makes grief bearable because it gives you steps. Step 1, wash. Step 2, wrap. Step 3, speak. Step 4, bury. Step 5, pour libation. Step 6, go home. Without steps, grief is a flood. City-states learn early that floods ruin everything, and gods are the dams for emotional floods. You stay respectfully at the edge of the gathering. You watch the pouring of water or beer onto the earth. You see a handful of dust tossed. You hear the name of an underworld deity invoked, not with fear alone, but with the practical tone of someone addressing an official. Please receive this person. Please keep them. Please don't send them back as a problem. This is where the city-state's desire for order becomes almost gentle. It's not just about control. It's about coping. Light joke number 3. If you've ever sent an email like, "Per my last message," you will appreciate the vibe of funeral prayers that sound like, "Just confirming you received this soul. Thank you." After the burial, people stand for a moment, then slowly disperse. Some touch the ground. Some touch their own chest. Some stare into nothing. Then they turn back toward the city, toward tasks and meals and life, because life is what the city-state is built to preserve. You follow them at a distance. The path back toward the wall feels like moving from one world to another. The living city has light, smell, noise. The burial ground has quiet and dust. The boundary crossing is psychological. You can almost feel the gods shifting with you. Outside here, underworld. Inside, temple, market, love goddess, storm god. The pantheon is an ecosystem, and the city-state is its habitat. As you step back through the gate, you feel your shoulders lift slightly, as if the city's walls can keep sorrow out, even though you know they can't. Yet the feeling is real. That's the power of built environments. They shape emotion, and emotion shapes belief. You walk past a household shrine where someone has placed a small lamp. The flame is steady. A simple act of remembrance, perhaps, or a protective light against restless spirits. The dead are not gone from the city-state's mind. They are simply assigned to the correct category. Ancestors, underworld, memory, and now you sense the next shift coming, because once a city-state has underworld stories and funerary rituals, those stories can be used politically. Empires will later absorb city-states and their dead, their gods, their underworlds, folding them into bigger systems. Local deities will have to adapt, merge, or resist. You breathe slowly, letting the heavy air soften around you. The city is quieter now. The night deepens. Somewhere, a lamp flickers. Somewhere, a family whispers an ancestor's name. Somewhere, the underworld god is imagined listening, patient and indifferent, like a clerk in a shadowed office. And you keep walking, knowing the timeline is about to widen. Because city-states are about to face something bigger than their walls. Empires. You feel it before anyone announces it, the way you feel a bigger animal approaching through the ground. The city's routines keep going. Sure, people still sweep courtyards, priests still burn incense, merchants still argue over weights. But there's a new tightness under the normal sounds, like a drum skin being pulled. The wall that once felt like the edge of the universe now feels like a small ring on a much larger map. Outside the gate, the roads are busier than they used to be. You walk near the administrative spaces, where messengers linger and officials talk in low voices. A runner arrives dusty and breathless, hands outstretched with a tablet or sealed message. A scribe breaks a seal with the care of someone handling a live scorpion. A city elder listens, nodding, not surprised but not happy. Whatever the message says, it carries the weight of someone else's decision. This is your mainstream historical fact for tonight, placed gently but unmistakably, as larger polities and empires expand in the ancient Near East. They often absorb or dominate city-states through conquest, vassalage, tribute systems, and administrative control, which can reshape local religious practice through syncretism, political theology, and state-sponsored cults. In short, when empires arrive, local gods either learn to share the room or get shoved into a corner. You step into the temple courtyard again, and it feels different now. Not smaller, but more self-conscious. The priests are still the priests, but their calm has an edge. Offerings are still placed, but there's a new emphasis on doing it right, like the city-state is trying to prove something. When your independence is threatened, you cling harder to what makes you, you, and the quickest way to be you is to be loyal to your patron deity. You overhear someone mention tribute, not just in grain, but in goods, textiles, oil, crafted items. The temple storehouse is involved, of course. The god owns the surplus, and now the surplus is being sent outward. The city-state has to explain this emotionally, because nobody likes watching their hard work leave on a donkey's back. So the explanation becomes divine. The god wills this. The god protects us through this. The god is testing us. It's the same language you've heard before. But the tone is different. It's less confident. It's more like someone repeating a mantra while their bank account drains. Light joke. Number 1. Nothing inspires sudden spiritual devotion like your resources being reallocated by a bigger power. Even the gods are probably like, wait, I didn't sign that. You walk toward the inner shrine area and sense more attendance than usual. Someone is cleaning. Someone is dressing the cult image. Someone is adding fresh pigment to a symbol. The god is being presented with extra polish, like the city-state is preparing for inspection. It's not only the deity who is honored, it's the city's identity that is being staged. Because empires don't just conquer land, they conquer narratives, outside, in a public space near the gate. You see something that makes your stomach tighten, an emblem you don't recognize at first, carried on a standard, not necessarily hostile in this moment, but unmistakably foreign. A small contingent of officials or soldiers stands with it, not marching, just existing, letting their presence do the talking. The city-state has a visitor who doesn't ask permission. You watch locals glance at the emblem and then glance away quickly. Like eye contact could be a commitment. A guard shifts their stance. A merchant goes quiet. A child stares and is pulled back by an adult. The empire's presence isn't only physical. It's psychological. It says, your walls are not the final authority anymore. And the gods feel that shift too. Here's your quirky tidbit for this section. In some imperial contexts, conquerors sometimes encourage or enforce the recognition of imperial gods alongside local deities. or they reinterpret local gods as forms or allies of a broader divine hierarchy. It's a spiritual merger and acquisition strategy. Nobody uses that phrase back then, but the vibe is identical. Congratulations, your deity has been acquired. Please enjoy expanded brand reach. Light joke number 2. Imagine telling a local patron a god. Good news, you're being promoted into a corporate pantheon. And the god is like, I hate meetings. You follow a group of city elders as they approach the imperial officials. The conversation is formal. The gestures are careful. Someone offers bread and salt or beer, a ritual of hospitality that also functions as negotiation. You notice, again, the gods being invoked, but now with a layered complexity. People swear by the local deity. Yes, but they also acknowledge the empire's divine claims, because refusing can be dangerous. This is how syncretism starts in real life, not as a philosophical choice, but as survival. Historians still argue whether religious blending under empires is primarily a bottom-up cultural process, driven by everyday interaction, intermarriage, and shared spaces, or a top-down political strategy used to legitimize rule and reduce resistance. Standing here, you can see both currents. Ordinary people start picking up foreign names because foreigners are now neighbors. Officials promote certain divine associations because it smooths governance. The gods, caught between currents, reshape again. You walk back into the temple district and notice a new inscription being prepared. A fresh tablet, a newly painted title. The god's name is written with extra epithets now, like Great Lord, King of Heaven, Protector of the Land. The city-state is inflating the god's status because status is a shield. If your god is important, maybe the empire will treat your city more carefully. Maybe your temple gets privileges. Maybe your identity survives. And sometimes that works. In other cases, the city-state adapts by translating. It says, our god is the same as your god, just under a different name. This is a clever compromise. It lets the city keep its rituals while acknowledging imperial power. It also changes the god's personality, adding new myths, new symbols, new relationships. The god becomes more universal, less local, and that is both protection and loss. You stroll past the market and hear merchants already adjusting. They mention new taxes. They mention new measures. They mention new routes opened by imperial roads. And that's the complicated truth. Empires are oppressive. Yes, but they can also stabilize trade and travel, making movement safer for some. A merchant might resent tribute and still enjoy fewer bandit attacks. Humans can hold contradictions like they're juggling clay pots and somehow not drop all of them. Light joke number 3. The empire is basically saying, we will protect you. And the city-state replies, from what? And the empire says, from us, mostly. At the city gate, you see scribes recording names, goods, origins. The paperwork has expanded. The city-state's old administrative habits are now plugged into a larger machine. The gods, too, become part of larger paperwork. Treaties are sworn in multiple divine names. Oaths become more complex. Priests learn to speak in ways that fit imperial expectations. Yet in the quieter streets, in the domestic corners, you notice resistance that isn't loud enough to be called rebellion but is real. A woman lights a lamp at a household shrine and whispers only the local deity's name, like a secret. A man touches a familiar symbol on his necklace before passing an imperial official, as if reminding himself who he is. Children learn the old stories at bedtime, even as they hear new ones in public. City-states are stubborn. Their gods are stubborn too. You return to the wall at dusk and watch the horizon. The land looks the same, flat and open, but now you imagine it threaded with imperial roads, dotted with garrisons, crisscrossed with administrative reach. The city-state once shaped gods to fit walls and granaries. Now it must shape gods to fit a world where walls are no longer enough. And the gods respond the way people do. They adapt, they merge, they take on new titles. They become patrons of empire as well as patrons of home. Or they retreat into intimate spaces, becoming more personal, more whispered, more about identity than administration. As night comes down, the city doesn't stop being itself. It just becomes a smaller self inside a larger world. You feel that layered reality settle over the streets like a second blanket. The temple still burns incense. The market still murmurs. The dead still have their quiet corner. But above it all hangs the awareness that a bigger power is watching. And that awareness will eventually invite a different kind of thinking, a different kind of question. Because when your gods are forced to share space, people start wondering what a god really is and whether divinity can be counted like grain or managed like a canal. You walk slowly back toward the center, letting your thoughts soften, already sensing that philosophers and skeptics are approaching the timeline like dawn approaching the horizon. Not loud, not sudden, but inevitable. You feel the shift most clearly in the way people talk when they think nobody important is listening. Not in the temple courtyard where every word can be overheard by an attendant with good posture, and not at the gate where imperial ears might be conveniently nearby, but in the half-private places, a shaded workshop, a rooftop at dusk, the back corner of a tavern where the beer is thin and the opinions are strong. The city-state is still a city-state. Yes, but now it lives inside a larger world. And larger worlds create larger questions. You walk past a small group of men seated on low stools, passing a cup in slow turns. Their hands are stained with work. Their eyes are tired. Someone is telling a story about the old days. The days when the city's patron deity felt like the only boss in town. Another man snorts softly and says something that makes the others glance around. Then the man repeats it, quieter. What if the gods aren't like we say they are? Not a shout, not a manifesto, just a question, laid down like a pebble in still water. Here is your mainstream historical fact for this section. In the ancient Mediterranean and Near Eastern worlds, especially as societies grow more interconnected, some thinkers begin to question traditional mythic accounts and explore more abstract ideas about divinity, nature, ethics, and the order of the cosmos, laying groundwork for philosophy and theology. Even if most people keep worshipping as usual, the habit of asking why starts to spread. And once why spreads, it does not politely stop. You drift onward, listening for more of this new tone. It's not necessarily disbelief. It's curiosity mixed with exhaustion. When empires shuffle gods like cards, when local deities gain foreign titles, when priests insist the ritual must be done precisely while the sky still does whatever it wants. Some minds begin to itch. They want a cleaner explanation, something that doesn't change every time an army crosses a border. You find a small gathering near a scribe's workspace. Clay tablets lie stacked, and a lamp throws a soft pool of light. A young man is speaking carefully, as if he knows words can be dangerous. He gestures toward the sky, then toward the temple district, then toward the river. He seems to be asking whether the divine is one thing behind many names, or many things pretending to be one, or maybe something else entirely that doesn't care what humans call it. You can feel the city-state's older religious structure in the background, like a drum that never stops. But over it, you hear a newer rhythm. Speculation, Historians still argue whether early philosophical questioning arises primarily from elite leisure and education or from broader social stress and cultural mixing that makes inherited explanations feel unstable. You can see both sources feeding the same fire. Some people have the time and training to think abstractly. Others have lived through enough upheaval to notice that official stories don't always match reality. You wander toward the temple courtyard and watch a ritual underway. Incense rises, a priest recites, offerings are arranged in the correct order, people bow, and yet, as you watch, you notice a small detail. A man in the crowd bows with everyone else, but his eyes are distant, not with disrespect, but with thought. It's the look of someone performing the expected motion while their mind quietly tries to draw a map underneath it. This is where the gods begin to change again. Not only through political absorption, but through intellectual reframing, instead of being only local patrons with strong opinions about gates and granaries. Gods become examples in arguments. They become metaphors. They become categories: the divine, fate, order, justice. City-states once shaped gods into administrators. Now thinkers begin shaping them into concepts. Light joke number 1. It's like the divine goes from a loud neighbor who bangs on your door to an abstract idea you argue about over drinks, which is a downgrade in immediate terror, but an upgrade in long-term headache. You slip away from the main ritual space toward the edges where lesser attendants tidy and wait. A novice speaks softly to another, repeating a phrase they heard from a teacher, that the gods might be manifestations of something deeper, or that the true divine might be unknowable, or that myths are stories meant to educate rather than literal histories. These ideas don't replace offerings overnight. The novice still lights lamps, still washes hands, still follows rules. But now there's an extra layer: interpretation. This is your quirky tidbit for tonight. Even in cultures with very traditional temple worship, you can find people treating myths as symbolic, allegorical, or instructive rather than purely literal, using stories of gods to explain moral lessons, natural patterns, or political truths. The myth becomes a tool for thinking, not just a record of sacred events. You can sense how that would feel in a city-state, comforting, because it lets you keep your rituals while adjusting your beliefs. Dangerous, because if myths are just stories, the priesthood's authority looks less absolute. You walk through a narrow lane where a teacher is speaking to a couple of older children. The teacher points to marks on a tablet, then to a simple diagram scratched in the dust. The children listen with the seriousness of kids who are proud to be treated like minds and not just small bodies. The teacher explains something about the sky, maybe the moon's cycle, maybe a pattern of stars, and you realize how knowledge itself is changing. It's becoming less secret, less purely temple-bound, at least in some places. The more people learn, the more they compare. The more they compare, the more they question, and the gods, being woven into everything, get pulled into the questioning too. You pause at a small roadside shrine where someone has left a portable charm, like the market travelers do. The charm is a little worn, but it's placed carefully. This is the other truth of the era. Even as intellectual debate blooms, ordinary devotional habits keep flowing. People still get sick. Babies still arrive, crops still fail, love still hurts, death still happens. Philosophy doesn't replace the need to whisper, "Please help." So the city-state's religious life becomes layered. Ritual on the surface, debate in certain circles, interpretation in the middle, and raw human need at the core. Light joke number 2. Humanity basically invents philosophy and immediately uses it to argue about whether we should still leave snacks for the gods. Spoiler, the gods keep getting snacks. Because nobody wants to be the one who finds out the hard way. You wander toward the administrative spaces where imperial policies are posted or announced. A scribe reads aloud. People listen. The language is official and heavy. Someone mutters that the empire's laws claim divine backing too, as if every power structure everywhere has decided the sky is their personal spokesperson. That triggers another kind of questioning. If multiple rulers claim divine sanction, who is right? Are the gods divided, or are humans simply using divine language as a tool? The question hangs like smoke. You walk to the wall at dusk and look out at the land. The horizon is calm. The sky is a gradient from gold to deep blue. The city behind you smells of cooking fires and damp clay. The world is quiet enough that you can hear your own breathing. In a moment like this, you can imagine why some minds start reaching for a single principle behind everything, a single order, a single something. Because the multiplicity of gods can feel like a crowd, and crowds can be tiring. Yet multiplicity also feels familiar, like family. A city-state god is personal. A universal principle is clean but distant. Historians still argue whether the move toward more abstract divinity in some traditions represents genuine spiritual evolution toward monotheism or philosophical monism, or whether it's simply one intellectual strand that coexists with persistent polytheistic practice. Standing here, you don't feel a sudden switch. You feel coexistence. The city-state keeps praying as it always has. While certain people start describing the divine in new vocabulary, you head back into the lanes and hear a late-night conversation spilling from a doorway. A man complains that the priests always want more offerings. A woman replies that offerings are cheaper than risk. Another voice, younger, says, "But what if justice matters more than offerings?" The others go quiet for a heartbeat. Then someone laughs awkwardly and changes the subject. Because moral questions are like storms. You can sense them coming, and you're not always ready. Light joke number 3. The first time someone says, "Maybe the gods care about ethics more than incense." You can practically hear the incense sellers gasp from 3 streets away. You keep walking, letting the city's sounds soften. The lamplight turns streets into pools of amber. The temple district glows faintly in the distance like a steady ember. You feel the timeline sliding toward its next inevitable move. If gods can become concepts, and if empires can blend pantheons, then old deities can fade into new names without fully disappearing. The divine can transform into symbols, saints, spirits, philosophies, habits. You pass a household shrine. The lamp is lit. Someone has placed a small offering. Maybe bread, maybe dates. The gesture is the same as it has always been, ancient and simple. Yet the meaning behind it might now be more flexible than before. The person might believe in the god as a being, or as a force, or as a tradition that keeps their family anchored. The act remains. And as you continue into the night, the city-state's gods feel less like fixed statues and more like living stories that can be retold, reinterpreted, and eventually, quietly, renamed. You wake into a quieter kind of change, the sort that doesn't arrive with marching feet or thunder, but with habit. The city-state still smells like smoke and clay. The temple still rises. The market still murmurs. But the divine world around you has started doing that slow, sneaky thing it always does, shifting shape while pretending it isn't. You walk along the main street at dawn, and you notice new symbols alongside old ones. A foreign emblem painted near a doorway. Not aggressively, just there. A local goddess's star scratched beside a newer sign, as if someone is hedging their bets. A traveler's charm hanging from a nail next to a temple-blessed token. The Pantheon is no longer a tidy neighborhood of familiar faces. It's becoming a layered city itself. Here is your mainstream historical fact for this final section. As cultures and religions interact over centuries through trade, conquest, and migration, deities and sacred practices often transform through syncretism, reinterpretation, and continuity under new names, with older divine figures sometimes absorbed into broader pantheons or reshaped into saints, spirits, or symbolic roles in later traditions. Gods rarely vanish cleanly. They evolve, and that evolution is usually quiet. You pass the temple district and see that the rituals continue. Incense still curls, offerings still arrive, priests still sing. But the language has expanded. Titles have multiplied. A god once known only as our protector is now called Lord of Many Lands, or Great King of Heaven, because the city-state has spent generations being forced into wider networks. The god has been rebranded for survival. Light joke. Number 1. The gods have basically updated their resumes. Experienced in granary management, border security, and now imperial diplomacy and cosmic governance. Very hireable. In the marketplace, you hear merchants speak casually of multiple divine names for the same thing, as if it's normal. In that city, they call him this. Here we call her that. People don't always fight about it. Sometimes they simply shrug, because in daily life, you want results. If the prayer works, the name feels secondary. And that's a big clue. City-states shape gods by demanding practicality. Practicality is what makes gods adaptable. A god that solves problems can be repackaged, translated, and carried forward. You step into a small courtyard where an elderly woman tends a household shrine. She places a lamp, adjusts it, and murmurs a blessing. The words she uses might be older than the wall itself, or they might be a blend, a hybrid phrase that includes a newer title and an older name. She doesn't stop to analyze it. She doesn't need to. The act is the anchor. The act is continuity. This is your quirky tidbit. Older divine figures can persist in folk practice even when official religion shifts, sometimes surviving as local spirits, protective ancestors, or saint-like figures in later eras, with rituals continuing in simplified or reinterpreted forms. The temple can change its theology. Households can keep lighting lamps. You keep walking and think about how city-states built the original divine ecosystem, the gods of walls, of granaries, of canals, of gates, of weddings, of funerals. Those roles don't disappear just because a new empire arrives or a new philosophy takes hold. The roles remain because human needs remain. So the divine roles get reassigned. A gate guardian becomes a protective spirit. A city patron becomes a heavenly protector. A fertility goddess becomes a saintly figure invoked for childbirth. An underworld ruler becomes a shadowy moral realm, a place of consequence. The city-state's old categories keep echoing even when the names change. Historians still argue whether these transformations represent continuity of belief beneath changing labels or genuine replacement with only superficial echoes remaining. Some scholars see deep persistence, old structures wearing new costumes. Others see real rupture, new religions and philosophies fundamentally changing how people relate to the divine. Standing in these streets, you feel both possibilities at once. The architecture of need is continuous. The stories told about that need can shift dramatically. Light joke number 2. It's like your favorite recipe getting passed down for centuries. Someone swears it's the same, but now it has completely different spices, and nobody can agree whether that counts as the same dish. You wander near the scribal spaces, and you imagine archives filling over centuries, Tablets and scrolls and inscriptions stacked like layers of sediment. Each layer contains an official version. Each official version tries to be final. But humans keep living, and living keeps generating new situations. So gods keep getting adjusted. A drought happens, and people reinterpret divine anger. A war happens, and a god becomes a symbol of resilience. A new ruler arrives, and the patron deity receives a new title. A philosopher speaks, and the divine becomes more abstract in educated circles. A mother loses a child, and she prays in the oldest words she knows anyway. This is what fade looks like. Not an ending, but a slow repatterning. You walk toward the wall, and it feels almost gentle now. Not because the wall isn't serious, but because you've watched it become symbolic. At first, it's protection against raids, then it's identity, then it's a memory of independence. Eventually, it becomes heritage. And the gods perched on it do the same thing. They shift from active defenders to cultural ancestors. Names people remember even if they don't fear them the way they used to. Light joke number 3. Imagine telling an old city-state god, you're not in charge anymore, but you are now a beloved cultural icon. That is basically the divine version of being retired and with a ceremonial plaque. You pass a small public shrine where the offerings are simpler than temple offerings. A few coins, a bit of bread, a flower. People still come here because it feels close. It feels human-sized. That is the secret survival strategy of old gods. They stay small enough to fit into ordinary life. Big institutions rise and fall. Household habits endure. You keep moving, and you realize the timeline you've walked is not only about gods changing. It's about cities teaching humans how to think. City-states teach specialization, boundaries, schedules, official memory, diplomacy, and identity. The gods are the mirror of those lessons. When you see a pantheon, you are seeing the shape of a society. And as societies change, the mirror changes too. Now, the wind down begins. You slow your pace. The streets soften around you. Lamps flicker behind woven screens. The air is cooler. Your body feels heavy in that pleasant way. Like your bones are settling into sand. The city-state, which once felt sharp-edged and anxious, feels distant now. Like a story you can fold up and place gently beside you. You walk one last time toward the river. It's quieter here. The water moves with that steady shush you heard at the start. The sound of time itself not caring about walls or empires. You listen. Your mind starts to loosen its grip on names and titles, because in the end, that's what changes most easily. What remains is the human act. Building, fearing, loving, losing, and whispering into the dark. You picture the gods not as statues now, but as soft silhouettes made of habit, a lamp lit, a bowl placed, a boundary respected, a promise sworn, a story told to a child. These are the threads that keep pulling forward, even when the tapestry's pattern changes. Your breathing slows. Inhale, like the river gathering itself. Exhale, like the river letting go. The city behind you is a low hum, safe enough at this distance to be just ambience. The stars overhead are steady and patient. You imagine centuries passing like clouds, and through them, the old city-state gods drifting, changing names, changing outfits, changing roles, but never fully disappearing as long as humans keep needing meaning to sit beside survival. You let that thought become a blanket. Not a heavy one, just a soft layer over your shoulders. The timeline is done, but the quiet continues. The river keeps moving. The walls keep standing in memory. The gods keep fading into new names. and those new names keep fading into the simple comfort of ritual. The kind of comfort that helps people sleep. Your eyes feel heavy now. The world is gentle. The last image you hold is lamplight trembling on water, and the feeling that history isn't a series of loud endings, but a series of soft transitions. End of script. Sweet dreams.